Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. On the night of March 18, 2018, at 11:43 p.m., the emergency line at the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office in Florida rang. The officer answering the call felt an immediate chill run through their body. But before they could make sense of the message, the call abruptly disconnected. With no clear information, an unsettling instinct told the officer that something horrific was happening out there. 6 minutes later, at 11:49 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, a man's voice came through. Unlike the first call, filled with static, this one was eerily calm, almost unnaturally so. The man reported an emergency and provided an address, 13248 Peck Lake Road. Without hesitation, the police dispatched a team to the scene. As the patrol cars pulled up to 13248 Peck Lake Road, they sensed something was terribly wrong. Flames were erupting violently from inside the house. The fire spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. Firefighters arrived just in time, scrambling to deploy their team. But before they could even attempt to extinguish the blaze, another horrifying sight stopped them in their tracks. In front of the house stood a black man, his body drenched in blood. Nearby, on the lawn, a woman lay motionless, her body covered in wounds. The police immediately ordered the man to raise his hands and lie on the ground. But he didn't comply. He staggered forward, his eyes vacant, muttering incoherent words. With no other choice, the police used a taser to subdue him. As he collapsed, he kept repeating a single phrase, "Allah is the greatest," a significant declaration in Islam. But what was even more chilling was his next statement, "KK is the devil. The kids are the devil's children too." At that moment, no one could tell if he was suffering from a mental breakdown. But one thing was certain, this case was far from simple. The overpowering stench of gasoline emanated from him, and his hands were still stained with fresh blood. Most critically, the woman lying motionless on the lawn, was she still alive? The police rushed to check on her and found her body covered in countless wounds, her clothes soaked red. There were no signs of life. Her breathing had stopped long ago. At that very moment, a young boy stumbled out of the burning house, clutching his stomach with both hands. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his clothes. With a trembling voice, as if summoning his last ounce of strength, he whispered, "My dad shot my mom." As the words left his mouth, his eyes rolled back, and his small body crumpled to the cold ground. The police immediately scooped him up and rushed him to the hospital in critical condition. Meanwhile, a firefighter named Donald received a report that another child was still trapped inside. Without hesitation, Donald plunged into the inferno. The searing heat engulfed him, as the ferocious flames devoured everything in their path. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline, a clear sign that someone had deliberately set the fire to erase evidence. Donald raced through each room, straining his eyes to see through the smoldering wreckage. Then, he spotted a small figure lying motionless on the bedroom floor. He rushed over and scooped the little girl into his arms. But the moment his fingers touched her icy skin, a crushing pain gripped his chest. He realized it was too late. In that instant, Donald's eyes welled up with tears. He had responded to countless fires and witnessed many lives lost in his career, but never had his heart shattered like this. Emerging from the ruined house, Donald clung to his teammate, unable to hold back his choked sobs. Once the fire was extinguished, forensic experts began examining the scene. What they discovered sent chills down their spines. In front of the house lay a broken shotgun. Inside the living room, they found a blood-soaked axe. Next to it, a knife caked in red. On the floor, an empty gasoline canister was discarded, a remnant of a ruthless plan. But the most horrifying sight was the blood. It was splattered everywhere. On the walls, the wooden floor, the furniture. What was once a family home had turned into a nightmarish scene of carnage. All the evidence was immediately collected and sent to the lab. Forensic experts quickly identified the two victims. The woman lying motionless on the lawn was Kenyatta Barron, 33 years old, affectionately known to friends as Kiki. The 9-year-old girl found inside was her daughter, Ranavia O'Neill. As the medical examiners analyzed their bodies, even those who had handled hundreds of murder cases couldn't help but shudder. Kenyatta's body was ravaged beyond belief. She had been shot twice. One bullet lodged in her right shoulder, another in her elbow. But those weren't the cause of her death. The left side of her head was covered in bruises and scratches. her skull fractured in 6 or 7 places. Several teeth were broken. The cause of death was determined to be severe trauma from countless wounds, a stark testament to the nightmare she endured before taking her last breath. If what Kenyatta suffered was already cruel, what happened to Ranavia was even more agonizing. The 9-year-old had been repeatedly struck on the head with a sharp object, identified as an axe. No one could bear to imagine what she went through. From the firefighter who found her to the forensic experts who examined her wounds, they all couldn't hold back their tears. This wasn't just a murder. It was a brutal, inhumane act of torture that shook the Florida community to its core. Though the tragedy had already unfolded and blood had stained the house, a glimmer of hope emerged from the ashes. Ronnie O'Neill IV, Kenyatta's 8-year-old son, the boy who had stumbled out of the burning house, was still alive. His small body was covered in cuts on his arms, face, and chest, deep gashes on his stomach. Over 25% of his skin severely burned. He had lost so much blood that his life hung by a thread. Doctors initially believed his chances of survival were nearly zero. How could a child with such injuries possibly endure? But against all odds, a miracle happened. After multiple emergency procedures, with an extraordinary will to survive, the boy defied death in an unbelievable way. In October 2017, while wandering the streets, Ronnie suddenly became the target of an unknown gunman. He was shot in broad daylight, blood pooling around him. But fate wasn't ready to end his story there. Ronnie was rushed to the hospital and survived. After his discharge, he found himself abandoned. His family turned their backs on him, and his new girlfriend wanted nothing to do with him. With nowhere left to turn, Ronnie reached out to the woman he had once discarded, Kenyatta. Kenyatta was a compassionate woman. Though she no longer had feelings for Ronnie and knew he was an irresponsible man, she couldn't turn a blind eye. He was, after all, the father of her children. So she decided to help him. She opened her door, welcoming her ex-partner back into her home, caring for him in his time of need. But Kenyatta could never have imagined that her act of kindness would mark the beginning of a horrific tragedy. A gesture of goodwill led to a devastating end for her and her children. A massacre had taken place. Even as investigators surveyed the scene, they struggled to comprehend Ronnie's true motive. How could he be so cruel as to kill his own children? Kenyatta had saved him when he had no one else, yet he repaid her by taking her life. That question, even years later, remains an unanswered mystery. During the investigation, the police found a key witness, James Gray, the fiancé of one of Kenyatta's neighbors. According to James, on the night of the incident, he was resting at home when he overheard a heated argument coming from the neighboring house. The voices were so loud they pierced through the walls, impossible to ignore. Curiosity got the better of him, and he stepped outside, opening his front door. At that moment, he saw 2 shadowy figures standing silently in front of Kenyatta's house. A sense of unease washed over him. He moved closer and was horrified to find Kenyatta lying motionless on the ground, right on her doorstep. Beside her stood Ronnie, looming like a ghost. In the dim light, James saw Ronnie dragging Kenyatta's arm, while clutching a long object in his other hand. At first, he couldn't make out what it was, but upon reflection, James believed it might have been a shotgun. Concerned, James called out, asking what had happened. Instead of answering, Ronnie suddenly shouted, "You wouldn't understand. She wanted to kill me." Then, like a man possessed, he yelled one final phrase before turning to walk back inside. "Allah is the greatest." Seeing this, James didn't dare act recklessly. He stood at a distance, watching silently, waiting for the police to arrive before leaving the scene. The police later interviewed several other witnesses, and their accounts aligned with James's statement. Neighbors confirmed that Kenyatta's home had always been quiet and harmonious. But ever since Ronnie moved in, everything changed. Fierce arguments became a regular occurrence. The sounds of shouting and objects being smashed were so frequent that many feared violence could erupt at any moment. On that fateful day, their fears became reality. What the police uncovered at the scene was even more chilling than the witnesses' testimonies. They found a blood-soaked axe. Forensic analysis revealed that the traces on it primarily belonged to Ranavia. The wounds on her body perfectly matched the axe's blade, confirming it as the primary weapon that took her life. The second weapon they discovered was a heavily damaged shotgun, showing signs of deliberate destruction. The bullet wounds on Kenyatta's body were consistent with this shotgun, suggesting Ronnie may have intentionally damaged it to erase evidence. Finally, a blood-stained knife was discovered amidst the wreckage of the scene. Forensic experts analyzed the traces, and confirmed the DNA on it belonged to little Ronnie. This could be the weapon that inflicted the wounds, nearly costing the child his life. Additionally, a large amount of gasoline had been poured throughout the house, proving Ronnie's intent to set the fire and erase the crime scene. Most crucially, all the weapons bore Ronnie's fingerprints. Although no witnesses directly saw the crime unfold, the indirect evidence gathered was overwhelming. The police had more than enough grounds to charge him. During his detention, Ronnie maintained a defiant attitude. He denied all accusations, showing no fear or remorse. At times, he even displayed a provocative demeanor, as if he were innocent. But then, he suddenly changed his tune. One day, Ronnie unexpectedly agreed to cooperate. During an interrogation, he offered an entirely different story, one he believed would exonerate him. He claimed that on that day, he and Kenyatta had only argued over trivial matters. In the heat of the argument, Kenyatta allegedly lost control, becoming aggressive and attacking him first. Not only that, he falsely accused Kenyatta of repeatedly abusing their own children in a brutal manner. With a tone dripping with pretense, he continued, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just used too much force and accidentally caused her death. I had no choice but to defend myself." As for the lives of their two children, Ronnie shamelessly shifted all the blame onto Kenyatta, brazenly fabricating it was all her doing. "I didn't do anything. I was just a father trying to protect my kids. My actions were no different from any other father in the world. They came from instinct." He didn't stop there. He even tried to use his 911 call as evidence, saying, "In the second call, I said Kiki wanted to kill me. That proves I was the victim, not the aggressor." But the police weren't easily fooled. They knew the evidence was stacked against Ronnie, and his statement was riddled with contradictions. If Kenyatta was the aggressor, why was she the one shot? If he was merely defending himself, why did he pour gasoline throughout the house to destroy evidence? If Kenyatta had harmed the children, why were Ronnie's fingerprints found on all the weapons? Clearly, everything he said was a lie. When arrested, Ronnie showed no signs of injury, no bruises or scratches to suggest he had been attacked by Kenyatta, as he claimed. On the contrary, all the traces on his body belonged to Kenyatta and the children. Moreover, Kenyatta's character completely contradicted Ronnie's accusations. Everyone who knew her described her as a gentle mother who loved her children dearly, with no signs of violence. There was no reason for her to attack her ex-partner or harm her own children. Yet Ronnie stubbornly clung to his victim narrative, concocting a contradictory story to cover up his crimes. But he couldn't have anticipated that his own son, the boy he forced to witness a horrifying scene, would become the most crucial witness against him. No matter how much Ronnie tried to justify himself, the testimony of his surviving son painted a raw and brutal picture of that night. The police listened to little Ronnie's account in heavy silence. Each word from the boy cut through the air like a knife, sending shivers down everyone's spine. That night, I was sleeping when I woke up to the sound of my parents arguing. They were fighting fiercely about religion. Then, I heard a loud crash. I got scared and opened my door to look. That's when I saw my dad holding a shotgun, pointing it straight at my mom. When Mom saw me, she yelled for me to go back to my room, and she ran into Ranavia's room to hide. But Dad didn't stop. He chased after her. Mom was so scared she hid in the closet. Then Dad turned to me, made me stand in the hallway outside the room, and forced me to shout, "Allah is the greatest." I was terrified, so I did what he said. While I was still shaking, a gunshot suddenly rang out from the room. Mom stumbled out, blood pouring everywhere. But Dad didn't stop. He grabbed my hand, put it on the gun, and forced me to pull the trigger on Mom. I was so scared, I didn't dare do anything. Mom was badly hurt, but still tried to run outside. I thought Dad would let her go, but he chased her to the door with the gun. Then another shot rang out. A while later, Dad came back. But this time, he wasn't holding the gun anymore. He had an axe. He went into Ranavia's room, dragged her into the hallway. She was screaming and begging, but Dad didn't care. He swung the axe at Ranavia over and over. During his detention, Ronnie maintained a defiant attitude. He denied all accusations, showing no fear or remorse. At times, he even displayed a provocative demeanor, as if he were innocent. But then, he suddenly changed his tune. One day, Ronnie unexpectedly agreed to cooperate. During an interrogation, he offered an entirely different story, one he believed would exonerate him. He claimed that on that day, he and Kenyatta had only argued over trivial matters. In the heat of the argument, Kenyatta allegedly lost control, becoming aggressive and attacking him first. Not only that, He falsely accused Kenyatta of repeatedly abusing their own children in a brutal manner. With a tone dripping with pretense, he continued, "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just used too much force and accidentally caused her death. I had no choice but to defend myself." As for the lives of their 2 children, Ronnie shamelessly shifted all the blame onto Kenyatta, brazenly fabricating. "It was all her doing. I didn't do anything. I was just a father trying to protect my kids. My actions were no different from any other father in the world. They came from instinct." He didn't stop there. He even tried to use his 911 call as evidence, saying, "In the second call, I said, Kiki wanted to kill me. That proves I was the victim, not the aggressor." But the police weren't easily fooled. They knew the evidence was stacked against Ronnie, and his statement was riddled with contradictions. If Kenyatta was the aggressor, why was she the one shot? If he was merely defending himself, why did he pour gasoline throughout the house to destroy evidence? If Kenyatta had harmed the children, why were Ronnie's fingerprints found on all the weapons? Clearly, everything he said was a lie. When arrested, Ronnie showed no signs of injury, no bruises or scratches to suggest he had been attacked by Kenyatta, as he claimed. On the contrary, all the traces on his body belonged to Kenyatta and the children. Moreover, Kenyatta's character completely contradicted Ronnie's accusations. Everyone who knew her described her as a gentle mother who loved her children dearly with no signs of violence. There was no reason for her to attack her ex-partner or harm her own children. Yet, Ronnie stubbornly clung to his victim narrative, concocting a contradictory story to cover up his crimes. But he couldn't have anticipated that his own son, the boy he forced to witness a horrifying scene, would become the most crucial witness against him. No matter how much Ronnie tried to justify himself, the testimony of his surviving son painted a raw and brutal picture of that night. The police listened to little Ronnie's account in heavy silence. Each word from the boy cut through the air like a knife, sending shivers down everyone's spine. That night, I was sleeping when I woke up to the sound of my parents arguing. They were fighting fiercely about religion. Then I heard a loud crash. I got scared and opened my door to look. That's when I saw my dad holding a shotgun, pointing it straight at my mom. When Mom saw me, she yelled for me to go back to my room, and she ran into Ranavia's room to hide. But Dad didn't stop. He chased after her. Mom was so scared she hid in the closet. Then Dad turned to me, made me stand in the hallway outside the room, and forced me to shout, "Allah is the greatest." I was terrified, so I did what he said. While I was still shaking, a gunshot suddenly rang out from the room. Mom stumbled out, blood pouring everywhere, but Dad didn't stop. He grabbed my hand, put it on the gun, and forced me to pull the trigger on Mom. I was so scared. I didn't dare do anything. Mom was badly hurt, but still tried to run outside. I thought Dad would let her go, but he chased her to the door with the gun. Then another shot rang out. A while later, Dad came back. But this time, he wasn't holding the gun anymore. He had an axe. He went into Ranavia's room, dragged her into she was screaming and begging, but Dad didn't care. He swung the axe at Ranavia over and over. Little Ronnie broke off, choking on his words, tears streaming down his young face. Trembling, he couldn't continue. But even this much was enough for the police to piece everything together. The boy's testimony was the final hammer blow to the case. The details matched the crime scene perfectly, from the locations of the wounds to the discarded weapons, proving an undeniable truth. Ronnie was the perpetrator. After committing this horrific crime, Ronnie took his cruelty to the extreme. He began to set the house ablaze, turning it into a raging inferno. He used tissues and clothing as kindling, then doused the place with gasoline. But that wasn't enough. As the fire spread, he turned on his own son. Before little Ronnie could react, he was struck hard in the stomach. In pain and panic, the boy tried to flee to the kitchen, hoping to find safety. But Ronnie didn't relent. He grabbed a knife and charged, plunging it straight into his son's stomach. By then, the flames had reached the boy. The searing pain of the burns mixed with the agony of the stab wound blurred his vision. The world spun around him, then faded to black. When the police arrived, they found a small, battered child, covered in wounds, struggling to crawl out of the blaze. In excruciating pain, the boy used his last ounce of strength to look at the officers and whisper, "My dad shot my mom." With that, he collapsed, losing consciousness. The police immediately rushed him to the hospital. When little Ronnie woke up in the hospital, the police were there to hear his story. What they learned left them speechless. An 8-year-old child had been forced to watch his father kill his mother, hunt down his sister, and then turn on him. Worse still, Ronnie had made his son complicit in the crime, forcing him to hold the and repeat the phrases he demanded. The boy's testimony also exposed all of Ronnie's lies. Earlier, Ronnie had deliberately made 2 calls to 911. In the first call, the police could still hear Kenyatta's desperate pleas, but by the second call, everything had fallen silent, indicating she had already been killed. Moreover, Ronnie repeatedly said during the call, "Kiki wanted to kill me." At this point, the police realized this wasn't a cry for help, it was a calculated deception. Ronnie had fabricated a story to paint himself as the victim. A recurring detail ran through the case, from the 911 calls to Ronnie's arrest to little Ronnie's testimony. Allah is the greatest. Why did Ronnie force his son to shout this while slaughtering his family? The police speculated that the motive for the murders might stem from a religious conflict. It's possible that on that day, Ronnie had pressured Kenyatta to convert to Islam, but she steadfastly refused. The tension between them escalated, ultimately erupting into a tragedy. With overwhelming evidence, the prosecutor swiftly filed charges against Ronnie, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, arson, and resisting law enforcement. At this point, the case seemed clear-cut. With irrefutable evidence and the critical testimony of little Ronnie, the trial was expected to proceed smoothly. But things were not as straightforward as they seemed. Ronnie suddenly declared, "I suffer from a mental illness and am not competent to stand trial." At first glance, this defense appeared to be a tactic to evade justice. However, upon examining his past, some began to question whether there might be truth to his claim. Ronnie had been abused as a child and later survived a shooting in a separate incident. A psychologist, Dr. McLean, evaluated him and confirmed that Ronnie indeed suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. This diagnosis could potentially alter the entire trajectory of the case. Individuals with PTSD can sometimes react violently when they feel threatened, even if the threat isn't real. If Ronnie committed the crime in a state of mental distress triggered by trauma, the law might consider a lighter sentence. Was Ronnie truly a man plagued by psychological wounds from his past? Or was this merely a facade to escape accountability for his crimes? After a thorough investigation, the court found Dr. McLean's conclusion unreliable. She had never directly interviewed Ronnie, relying solely on one-sided accounts from his family to make her assessment. Consequently, the court rejected her evaluation, refusing to recognize it as valid evidence in the case. Furthermore, there was no evidence linking Ronnie's PTSD to the crimes he committed. On the contrary, his actions demonstrated clear premeditation. After killing Kenyatta, he deliberately called 911, fabricated a story to portray himself as the victim, targeted the only witness, his own son, and set the house ablaze to destroy all evidence. If he were truly out of control due to a mental condition, could he have planned everything so meticulously and coldly? Ultimately, after evaluations by other psychologists, the court concluded that Ronnie was fully competent to stand trial. Yet, instead of showing fear or remorse, Ronnie displayed blatant arrogance. He refused to hire a lawyer, insisting on representing himself. The judge repeatedly warned him that this was an unwise decision, potentially costing him important legal rights during the trial. But Ronnie didn't care. Like other brazen criminals, he was confident in his oratory skills, believing his sharp words could turn the tide in his favor. However, reality proved that such individuals often dig their own graves. This decision led to a grim irony. Ronnie was forced to confront his own son, the child he had once tried to kill. On June 16, 2021, the trial officially began. From his opening statement, Ronnie exhibited clear signs of instability and chaos. His words were incoherent, lacking logic. He incessantly denied all charges, proclaiming his innocence while loudly accusing the prosecution of fabricating a case to frame him. He claimed his son was traumatized after witnessing the crime scene, rendering his testimony unreliable. He further alleged that forensic experts had tampered with evidence, adding wounds to Kenyatta's body to incriminate him. At one point, he audaciously declared that police had staged the entire 911 call to manipulate the case. His outlandish claims left the courtroom momentarily silent in disbelief. But Ronnie pressed on, loudly proclaiming, "The evidence I present will show we're living under a corrupt government." No one believed him. Then, the trial reached its most critical moment, Ronnie's cross-examination of his son. Throughout the questioning, Ronnie relentlessly tried to make his son's testimony appear inconsistent. He insisted the boy hadn't seen him commit the crime, But as the dialogue between father and son unfolded, the truth was laid bare in a harrowing manner. When Ronnie asked if he had harmed him, the boy replied that his father had stabbed him in the stomach with a knife, silencing the courtroom. The cross-examination lasted over an hour. Although the boy didn't directly witness his father pull the trigger on his mother during the time of the crime, only the two of them were in the house, and he had seen his father chase his mother with a shotgun. This time, Ronnie couldn't deflect or deny the truth. Realizing he had no way out, he was forced to admit his crimes. In his closing statement, he coldly declared, remarkably, even when facing his sentence, he maintained his arrogance, boldly stating in court, without a shred of remorse or regret, Ronnie remained defiant and cold until the very end. It didn't take long for the jury to reach a verdict, finding him guilty on all charges. On July 23, 2021, the court sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 90 years in prison. This meant he would never have the chance to walk free again. During the sentencing, Judge Michelle Cisco delivered haunting remarks. In my 19 years in the justice system, I've presided over many criminal cases, but this case is by far the most heinous. No other case can compare. She went on to condemn Ronnie's actions, calling them utterly cruel and unforgivable. After the sentencing, Ronnie appealed to the Florida Appellate Court, but the outcome remained unchanged. The sentence was upheld. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars, facing the consequences of the atrocities he committed. Above all, amidst this devastating tragedy, one survivor emerged, little Ronnie. At the time of the crime, the boy was just 8 years old. Not only did he witness his father attack his mother, but he was brutally attacked by him as well. Though he miraculously survived, the physical and emotional scars he carries are immeasurable. Many worried that the horrific memories would leave a deep wound in his soul, severely impacting his future. During his recovery in the hospital, little Ronnie had no family by his side, no one to care for him, no one to protect him. The image of the boy lying alone in his hospital bed broke many hearts. Moved by his plight, several police officers took turns visiting, talking to, and comforting him during his darkest days. The most frequent visitor was Detective Mike Blair. Though not directly assigned to the case, Mike was one of the first responders at the scene that night. He had seen little Ronnie stagger out of the burning house, his body covered in wounds, his breathing faint. That moment etched itself into Mike's memory, an image he couldn't forget. Heartbroken by the boy's circumstances, Mike made it a point to check on him regularly during his hospital stay. Even after little Ronnie was discharged and placed with a foster family, Mike kept his promise. He gave his phone number to a Child Protective Services worker, instructing them, "If the boy needs me, call me immediately." In August 2018, Mike Blair received a call from Child Protective Services. The worker informed him that little Ronnie was struggling to adjust to his foster family, and they were urgently seeking a new home for him. Without hesitation, Mike replied, "Bring the boy to my house." He hadn't even discussed it with his wife, but deep down, he knew his kind-hearted wife, Daniel, would open her arms to welcome the boy. A child who had lost everything deserved a true home. However, the decision to adopt little Ronnie was far from simple. The boy bore not only severe burns across much of his body, requiring countless painful surgeries, but more importantly, his young soul had been deeply scarred by the family tragedy. Helping him heal, both physically and emotionally, would be an immense challenge. Moreover, Mike and Daniel already had a large family with 5 children. Taking in a stranger, especially one carrying such profound trauma, was no easy decision, but their compassionate hearts urged them to do it, no matter the difficulties. After months of navigating legal procedures, on November 25, 2019, little Ronnie officially became a member of the Blair family. The boy was given a new identity, a new life, Ronnie Blair. Throughout the trial that followed, Ronnie clung to the fact that his son had been adopted, using it as an excuse to discredit the boy's testimony. He loudly claimed that his son had been manipulated, that his new family had coached him to accuse his father. In a final attempt to undermine his son's statements, Ronnie chose to cross-examine him again in court, asking if his new family had fed him negative ideas. But each resolute and unwavering response from little Ronnie cut through his father's last hopes like a knife. In truth, Mike had never spoken about the tragic case since adopting little Ronnie. He understood better than anyone that the boy had endured enough pain, and the most important thing wasn't to dredge up the past, but to help him look toward a brighter future. Thanks to the unconditional love and dedicated care of the Blair family, little Ronnie gradually overcame his haunting past. His physical wounds began to heal, but more importantly, his soul found peace. From a boy who had endured unimaginable suffering, little Ronnie finally gained a true home. And with that, today's case comes to a close. Case 2. It was Friday, June 1st, 2007, in the Hayes Valley area of San Francisco Bay. That day, Hughes, a 36-year-old man affectionately nicknamed Brother Hughes by his friends, was brimming with joy. He had just been promoted and received a raise at Leapfrog, the gaming company where he worked as the lead audio engineer. Hughes was known for his humor, always bringing laughter to those around him. Around 10:30 p.m., Hughes and his friends headed to Underground SF, a bar in downtown San Francisco. They raised their glasses, sang, and danced, savoring the weekend's joy. Amid the lively music and flashing lights, a photo captured Hughes in the heat of the moment on the dance floor, wearing a cap, a watch, and holding a drink. No one could have imagined it would be the last photo of him alive. By 2 a.m., the bar closed, and the group reluctantly parted ways. Hughes, a single man full of energy, told his friends he'd continue the night with a beautiful woman he'd met. Before leaving, he reminded everyone about their motorcycle ride planned for Saturday morning. Under the night sky, his friends waved goodbye. Hughes walked back alone to his apartment at 462 Linden Street, just a 10-minute stroll from the bar. The next morning, at 8:10 a.m., Carl, a neighbor in the same building, was about to head out when he suddenly noticed bloodstains smeared across the front steps near the fence. A chilling premonition gripped him. In a panic, Carl quickly pulled out his phone and dialed 911. The San Francisco Police Department, SFPD, arrived swiftly at the scene. They followed a trail of blood up the stairs to apartment 462. The doorknob was covered in blood. Despite their persistent knocking, there was no response from inside. Left with no choice, they went around to the back of the apartment, broke down the door, and entered. Inside, a sharp metallic stench filled the air. The room was in chaos. Shattered wine glasses, a toppled TV, tangled cords, and blood splattered everywhere. Desperate scratch marks marred the walls and door. Hughes lay slumped against the bedroom wall in a pool of dried blood. He was no longer alive. Based on the body's temperature, the preliminary coroner's report estimated the time of death to be between 2:30 a.m. and 3 o'clock a.m., just an hour after he left the bar. Only an hour earlier, he had been laughing and chatting with friends, and now, he lay there in a tragic state. What had happened? Hughes' sudden death left his friends in shock, including his ex-girlfriend, Melissa Nix. Though she was in Washington, she immediately booked a red-eye flight to San Francisco. Hughes, a Frenchman working for an American company, had been deeply cherished. Early the next morning, on the other side of the globe, his parents were jolted awake by the incessant ringing of the phone. Groggily, they answered, only to hear Melissa's choked voice. Those few words struck like a bolt of lightning, plunging the elderly couple into an abyss of grief. Their world seemed to collapse. Overwhelmed by sorrow and confusion, they had no time to process the news. Hastily packing their bags, they set off for the United States. Meanwhile, the San Francisco police were facing a challenge. The Bay Area was no stranger to cases, but none had stumped them quite like Hughes. First, both the front and back doors of the apartment were locked from the inside. The keys were still in the room. The windows were shut tight with no signs of tampering. Before the police broke in, the apartment was essentially a perfectly sealed space. The incident occurred in the early hours, yet the lights in the apartment were off. Leftover food sat untouched on the kitchen counter. All evidence suggested no strangers were in the apartment at the time of the incident. Furthermore, Hughes' belongings were intact. His phone, laptop, and wallet remained in place. In his pocket were his car keys, driver's license, and $80 in cash. The police checked receipts and confirmed nothing was missing. Clearly, this wasn't a robbery turned murder. Inspecting the scene, investigators noted the floor was covered in blood and bloody shoe prints. However, all the prints belonged to Hughes. The patterns on the soles were distinct, with no signs of a struggle or scuffle. It appeared as though Hughes had been moving around the apartment on his own. Following the footprints, investigators noticed a trail of tiny blood droplets amidst the larger smears. These droplets stretched from the front door, down the hallway, through the kitchen and living room, and stopped where Hughes had collapsed. The droplets were perfectly round, with no streaks, indicating the blood had fallen straight down in a calm manner. In other words, Hughes had moved through the apartment very slowly, as if struggling in his final moments. The autopsy began at 4:10 p.m. The victim was approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighed 176 pounds. He was a Caucasian man with brown hair, showing signs of a receding hairline. Hughes' hair was about 4 inches long. In life, he had undergone a circumcision procedure. These details would later prove relevant to the case. Hughes had 3 major wounds, all on the left side of his body. He had been stabbed once in the abdomen, once in the chest, and once in the neck with a sharp object. His left lung was pierced, and the neck wound was the most severe, severing an artery and causing acute blood loss. This was the fatal blow. Hughes had collapsed on the floor, a bruise on his forehead, his arms slightly raised. There were scratches on his forearms, and the watch strap on his right wrist was broken, lying beneath him. Most curiously, his left hand was tightly clutching a tuft of curly black hair, more than 10 strands, each less than 2 inches long. This was unmistakably a murder. However, as the investigation deepened, the direction of the inquiry grew perplexing. While examining Hughes' personal belongings, the police discovered he wasn't just an ordinary office worker. He had an artistic soul, with a passion for reading and writing. In his notebook, a neatly written quote stood out: "Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever." This famous saying, popularized by Mahatma Gandhi, caught the police off guard. Die tomorrow. Could Hughes have taken his own life? In reality, the police fixated on this phrase while overlooking its deeper meaning. The quote encourages living fully, cherishing life as if each day were the last, and learning continuously as if one would live forever. It could be said that the police completely misunderstood the essence of the words. Hughes' phone lay on the coffee table nearby, completely free of bloodstains. This indicated that before his death, he hadn't attempted to call 911 for help. In the chaotic kitchen, near the sink, were 2 steak knives, their handles stained with a reddish liquid. The police believed these were the weapons used to take Hughes' life. Meanwhile, investigators outside the apartment continuously reported new findings. The building where Hughes lived housed 4 units. A couple living next door to his apartment stated that around 2:40 a.m., just before Hughes' estimated time of death, they were awakened by the sound of a door being forcefully opened and closed. They then heard footsteps running down the stairs, followed by a loud thud, as if someone had fallen. There were no screams or cries for help. A few seconds later, everything fell silent until the next morning, when they learned a murder had occurred. A short distance west of the building, a surveillance camera on a garage door captured footage of Hughes walking alone around 2 a.m. Though the image was blurry, his ex-girlfriend and family confirmed it was him. Throughout the night, the street remained quiet, with no suspicious individuals seen entering or leaving the building. It wasn't until 8:30 a.m. that the police arrived at the scene. Piecing together the timeline, it was clear Hughes was alone in his apartment. This further supported the suicide theory. The coroner's report also concluded no signs of forced entry. The blood and hair found in the apartment all belonged to Hughes. All DNA samples matched him. After reviewing all the evidence in less than a week, the San Francisco Police Department, SFPD, swiftly closed the case and reconstructed the events of Hughes' death. According to their theory, that night, Hughes had consumed alcohol and drugs at the party, slipping into a state of hallucination and panic. Upon returning home, he grabbed a knife from the kitchen and harmed himself. He inflicted 3 stab wounds to the left side of his body, causing heavy bleeding. The pain briefly brought him back to clarity, but it was too late. In desperation, he staggered to the door, pacing around the steps and leaving a trail of blood, perhaps hoping to leave a sign for his neighbors. But then he returned inside, waiting for death to come. However, as a perfectionist, Hughes had allegedly created a ritual for his departure. He locked the door from the inside, to ensure he wouldn't change his mind. Then, clinging to the walls, he stumbled around, leaving bloody fingerprints behind. Finally, he chose a dramatic spot to collapse. The police even suggested that Hughes had shown signs of giving up on life beforehand. The Gandhi quote, they claimed, was his suicide note, missing only a signature and the words, "This is my suicide note." Faced with this absurd conclusion, Hughes' family and friends resolved to seek justice for him. Melissa, his ex-girlfriend, was the most determined. Memories of Hughes always warmed her heart. She vowed that no matter how the police investigated, she would uncover the truth. That Hughes was born on June 11, 1970, in a coastal town in Brittany, France. His father, Francois, was an engineer at a nuclear power plant. Coming from a well-off family, Hughes received a good education. He carried himself with a refined demeanor and was the pride of his parents. In 1998, Hughes moved to New York, chasing the American dream with 100,000 francs in hand. He was quickly captivated by the city's glamour. At a social event, he met Melissa, a reporter. Sharing many interests and endless topics, from museums, philosophy, and art to travel and animals, they soon fell in love. Over their 5 years together, they broke up and reconciled multiple times. But happiness defined most of their relationship. They traveled across the U.S. and around the world together. Even after their final breakup, they remained close friends. Hughes' friends described him as an optimist, always ready to help others. He was constantly smiling and maintained a close bond with his parents, calling home weekly. No one could believe he would end his life just as he was about to turn 37. When Melissa and Hughes' parents visited the police station, they were met with coldness and dismissiveness. The police suggested that Hughes, with his fascination for Japanese culture, might have committed suicide in the samurai tradition of seppuku. While this reasoning sounded plausible on the surface, it was deeply superficial. Frustrated by the police's irresponsibility, Melissa believed the best way to honor Hughes was to take immediate action. As a journalist, she understood the power of public opinion. Justice for all. Alongside Hughes' family, friends, and colleagues, Melissa took to the streets to demand justice for his death. Meanwhile, Hughes' parents, despite their grief, were determined not to let their son die in vain. They hired a private investigator, dubbed the Columbus of California, with 25 years of experience and over 5,000 cases under his belt. Within just 1 week, he painted a very different picture of Hughes' case. This picture of Hughes' life almost entirely contradicted the police's suicide conclusion. Hughes was an audio engineer earning over $70,000 annually. He was cheerful, humorous, passionate, and loved exploring. He saved monthly, with nearly $100,000 in his account, aiming to buy a house in Argentina. 2 weeks before the incident, Hughes had been promoted and received a raise. That night, he went to the bar to celebrate with friends. Before leaving, he reminded his best friend about their motorcycle ride the next day. That weekend, he had also planned to meet a fellow French friend in California. A vibrant, life-loving young man, with a bright future like Hughes, had no reason to abandon his life. However, the private investigator began uncovering some of Hughes' secrets. After his breakup with Melissa, Hughes had let himself go. He became a playboy, uninterested in stable relationships, instead indulging in fleeting romantic encounters. Social media and adult websites became his tools. Friends tried to advise him, but he brushed them off, continuing his promiscuous lifestyle, chasing thrills and pleasure. On the night of the incident, as he parted ways with his friends at the bar, Hughes excitedly mentioned he'd find a beautiful woman to spend the night with. To heighten the excitement, he also used drugs, which connected him to some unsavory characters. The investigator, familiar with the area, knew that Linden Street often attracted sex workers, drug dealers, and criminal gangs late at night. Hughes might have gotten entangled in a deal or made enemies, leading to a retaliatory attack. Yet, according to the security footage, Hughes returned home alone, with no signs of being followed. The investigator's instincts told him there was still a hidden secret, a crucial clue yet to be found. While the investigator was digging deeper, he received the coroner's report from the San Francisco police, and was utterly stunned by its absurdity. First, the report showed that aside from alcohol, Hughes had no traces of drugs in his system. Without drugs, how could he have hallucinated and stabbed himself? Second, the steak knives had no blood on their blades, only a faint red mark on the handles. Moreover, the report was riddled with gaps. Hughes' father, Francois, voiced his skepticism. Hughes' height was 6 feet, not 5 feet 9 inches. He had never undergone circumcision. Hughes was also a karate enthusiast with a strong physique. If attacked, he would have fought back. In his left hand, he clutched a tuft of black hair that wasn't his own. Yet, the coroner hadn't tested its DNA. After examining the scene, the investigator discovered a blind spot in the surveillance camera's coverage. The camera only recorded from west to east, meaning it captured Hughes entering the building. If someone approached from the opposite direction, the camera wouldn't have recorded them. Based on crime scene photos, the investigator and Hughes' father proposed a theory. Hughes arrived home and, for some reason, opened the door. He encountered an assailant and was stabbed 3 times. During the struggle, he grabbed a tuft of the attacker's hair. Injured, he retreated inside and locked the door. Due to the neck wound, he couldn't cry for help. The assailant then climbed over the fence and fled. If this theory held, Testing the bloodstains on the front steps could provide a lead, but the police claimed they couldn't test them. No samples had been preserved. The fire department had washed down the scene to avoid alarming passers-by. And the steak knives with no blood? The police offered a flimsy explanation. Perhaps Hughes, a clean freak, had wiped the knife clean even as he lay dying. This reasoning drew sharp criticism from the media. Finally, in December 2007, the San Francisco police were forced to reclassify the case as a death of unknown cause. Some journalists pointed out that this could be a tragedy of a foreigner in America. Hughes, being an outsider with no family or close relatives in the U.S., wouldn't cause significant repercussions with his death. More critically, at the time, the security situation in the San Francisco Bay Area was a major headache for the police. After the incident, due to a lack of manpower, the police hastily concluded it was a suicide or an undetermined death. This allowed the crime statistics to look better, avoiding any negative impact on the election campaigns of local politicians. Meanwhile, Hughes' parents, after returning to France, refused to give up. They hired a lawyer and brought the case to the High Court of Paris. A year later, a team of French investigators was dispatched to San Francisco to restart the investigation into Hughes' death. Hughes' mother noted that this was the first time foreign police had come to San Francisco to enforce the law. However, upon arriving in the U.S., the French police faced a cold reception from their American counterparts. The SFPD refused to hand over the case files. The detectives and forensic experts originally assigned to the case had since retired. Francois, Hughes' father, had to turn to the French embassy for assistance. After contacting authorities in Washington and receiving directives, the San Francisco police finally relinquished the documents. Only then could the French police begin their analysis. They interviewed over 50 people, recovered data from Hughes' computer and phone, and reconstructed his final hours. On the morning of June 1st, Hughes clocked in at work. He chatted with colleagues. At 5 p.m., he returned home. After showering, he visited an art gallery for a date. Past 10 p.m., he joined colleagues at a bar to celebrate. At 2:16 a.m., a camera captured him arriving home. After returning, he browsed real estate listings in Argentina, logged into social media, and visited an adult website. At 2:20 a.m., he called a friend, who later recounted that Hughes mentioned wanting to find drugs and spend the night with a woman. Those were his final words. At 2:40 a.m., Hughes' laptop suddenly disconnected, a sign that the power cord had been unplugged. This time frame remains a mystery. Shortly after, neighbors heard unusual sounds. A door being opened and closed, hurried footsteps on the stairs. Then, an eerie silence followed. Hughes had a habit of keeping an open dating life, never turning down any woman. Could he have angered a woman's husband or boyfriend, leading to a vengeful attack? At this point, a suspect emerged. Mark, Hughes' boss. Unlike grieving colleagues, Mark displayed an odd demeanor, even seeming gleeful. Upon investigation, it was revealed that Mark's wife had once had an affair with Hughes. Could Mark, humiliated by his subordinate, have killed Hughes? However, Mark's alibi cleared him of suspicion. Additionally, neighbors mentioned a small side door to the right of the building, unmonitored by cameras. This door was used for trash disposal or parking. In the crime scene footage, there appeared to be bloodstains on the brick wall near the side door, but the San Francisco police had overlooked it. By the time the French police arrived, the scene had been destroyed. After a second autopsy, the French police confirmed that Hughes had no drugs in his system. However, the tuft of curly black hair found in his hand had vanished. Based on the size and depth of the stab wounds, they determined the murder weapon was a dagger, not a steak knife. Judging by his attire and final phone call, it seemed Hughes was preparing to go out for a date, but encountered trouble right at his doorstep. The red liquid on the steak knife turned out to be tomato sauce, not blood. In other words, no murder weapon was found at the scene. The French police also uncovered a critical detail. The security camera at the nearby garage only took snapshots every 4 seconds. If someone moved quickly, their image might not have been captured. Most significantly, inside the broken watch strap found beneath Hughes' body, traces of blood were discovered. DNA testing revealed that this blood did not belong to the victim. After 15 days of investigation, the French police released a 2,000-page report concluding that Hughes had been murdered. More than a year after the incident, Hughes' cause of death was officially determined to be homicide. But who was the perpetrator? Despite the French police's conclusion, the SFPD stated the case was still under review. Yet they remained passive, making no effort to identify a suspect whose DNA matched the evidence. They claimed there wasn't enough evidence to compel anyone to provide a DNA sample. Faced with this deadlock, in February 2009, Hugh's father, Francois, decided to offer a $100,000 reward to encourage the public to help uncover the truth. His flyers quickly spread across the streets of San Francisco. Another theory emerged: the perpetrator might be someone familiar with the area. The house on Linden Street had 2 floors, each with 2 apartments. On the first floor, Hughes lived in the apartment on the right, while a couple occupied the one on the left. On the second floor, Carl lived in the apartment on the right, and Craig in the one on the left. After news of the reward spread, an anonymous caller pointed to Craig as a suspect, claiming he was erratic and capable of killing to silence a witness. The investigation revealed that Craig had once been a member of the notorious PCP crime gang, involved in trafficking drugs, weapons, and other illegal dealings. Though Craig claimed to have reformed, he still carried a small knife, a remnant of his criminal past. Craig and Hughes had clashed heatedly over a parking spot. Neighbors confirmed hearing a fiery argument from Craig's apartment, filled with death threats and terrified screams. Francois, Hughes' father, had met Craig and found him friendly. Craig had even bought Hughes' old bicycle, leaving a good impression. So, what could be the motive for murder? Could minor disputes escalate to such a crime? The knife Craig carried was a cable-cutting tool, not matching Hughes' wounds. After the incident, Craig suddenly disappeared, becoming homeless. The private investigators searched tirelessly, but to no avail. When asked for assistance, the San Francisco police refused, citing insufficient evidence. Facing this deadlock, Francois, Hughes' father, resolved to seek justice himself. He spent years traveling between San Francisco and Brittany, tirelessly collecting DNA samples from those who had lived near his son. Despite many residents having moved away, he remained undeterred. Francois met with anyone who might provide information about the case. With the investigators' help, he persuaded Craig to meet at a cafe, hoping Craig would agree to provide a DNA sample for testing. In 2010, Melissa became a beacon of hope for Hughes' case. Through her persistence and unwavering effort, she forced the San Francisco police to reconsider their hasty conclusion. Melissa's contributions were recognized with the prestigious James Madison Award. Without her, Hughes' case might have been forgotten. She courageously exposed the SFPD's sluggishness, contributing to positive changes in investigative practices. Now a renowned journalist, Melissa continues to follow Hughes' case annually, questioning the investigation's progress. The police still offer vague responses, but everyone knows they're merely evading accountability. The latest update on Hughes' case came in November 2021. On his memorial Facebook page, Melissa Nix, his ex-girlfriend, posted, "The case remains open." Francois, Hughes' father, expressed his unshakable resolve. "I will never stop seeking the truth, no matter where I have to go. I will never give up hope." The mystery surrounding Hughes' death remains unsolved. Online communities have proposed 2 theories that might hold the key to cracking the case. The first theory: Hughes was killed during an illegal drug deal. Motives for murder often stem from romance, money, or revenge. A romantic motive lacks evidence, and a financial motive seems unlikely. Hughes had no clear enemies. The most plausible scenario is a settling of scores between Hughes and drug dealers. Hughes was known to occasionally use drugs. On the night of the incident, he told friends he was looking for something to heighten his excitement. The area where Hughes lived was a hub for drug trafficking gangs who were well versed in the terrain and skilled at evading camera surveillance. According to Francois, the lights in Hughes' apartment were still on after he returned home, possibly signaling a drug deal. A dealer arrived, but instead of a transaction, a dispute erupted, leading to Hughes' death. The killer escaped through a camera-free route while Hughes collapsed inside. The second theory, a mistaken assassination linked to Craig. Given Craig's dark past and tangled connections, he might have been targeted. The perpetrators, familiar with the building and the camera's blind spots, set an ambush, but Hughes became the victim. They may have entered the wrong apartment or killed him to cover their mistake. In the darkness, Hughes could have been stabbed by mistake. Alternatively, the killer, fearing exposure, silenced him to tie up loose ends. For 62 Linden Street, 18 years later. The building is now surrounded by a sturdy fence, but 18 years ago, the mystery of Hughes' death remained unresolved. His loved ones continue their relentless pursuit of justice. Hughes' story, a reminder of life's fragility, deserves to be remembered forever. Over a decade has passed, and the case has opened multiple investigative avenues, from romantic motives and personal conflicts to the possibility that Hughes was killed over drugs or became the victim of a mistaken attack. Yet, no theory has enough evidence to close the case, leaving it an enduring mystery. And so, today's video comes to an end. Hughes' case remains open, but serves as an important reminder about safety, especially for those living abroad in areas with poor security. Being cautious around strangers, avoiding going out late at night, and staying in touch with loved ones can help reduce risks. Case 3. On February 24, 2023, Fairfax County Police in Virginia responded to a call from the Banfield family home. A man identified as Joseph Ryan had broken into the house with a knife and attacked Christine Banfield, who was home alone at the time. Joseph was subdued by Brendan Banfield and Juliana Perez, who arrived at the house shortly afterward. Brendan was Christine's husband and Juliana was the family's nanny, having worked for them for nearly 2 years. Christine was taken to the hospital in critical condition, but she succumbed to her injuries and passed away. What initially seemed like a home invasion, followed by a murder, later turned out to be part of a larger conspiracy. Hey everyone, how are you doing? Welcome back to the channel, and in today's video, I will talk about a case that happened in the state of Virginia. This case, folks, seems more like a suspense movie script. It has betrayal, it has conspiracy, and of course, it has death. Guys, this video ended up being quite long because I brought all the details of this story for you. So, I ask you to stay with me here until the end to better understand this story. So, without further ado, let's go to the video. In 2003, at the age of 18, Christine enrolled at Quinnipiac University in Connecticut to study nursing. In 2004, during her first year of college, she met Brendan Robert Banfield, and shortly afterward, they began dating. Christine graduated in 2007, and a year later, in 2008, Brendan proposed to her. Their engagement lasted about 2 years, and on June 12, 2010, they got married. At the time, Christine was 24, and Brendan was 25. Christine was a very dedicated nurse who loved her work. She typically worked 16-hour night shifts, a tiring routine, but one she enjoyed. On her social media, Christine occasionally shared her workout journey at a nearby gym. In some of her posts, it was clear that Brendan accompanied her to the gym. Additionally, those close to the couple say that Brendan was always supportive and encouraging of his wife, often complimenting her. Christine even posted once on her social media about how happy she was when her husband motivated her at the gym, especially after he noticed the difference the healthy routine had made in her body. Brendan, on the other hand, was much more private and didn't usually post much about his personal life on social media. Brendan was a federal agent working for the IRS, investigating potential tax fraud and evasion. Christine and Brendan built their life together. Since they met in college and started dating there, they achieved everything they had as a team. According to those close to them, they seemed like a very united couple. They went to soccer games, parties, took vacations, and traveled to other countries. We can say they were a typical American couple who met when they were young and had many plans ahead. The couple lived for a while in New York, but later moved to Virginia. In Virginia, they settled in Herndon, a city in Fairfax County with a population of over 24,000 people. They lived in a house worth $1 million, located in one of the city's best neighborhoods. The couple was doing very well financially. Both had great salaries, and they enjoyed a very comfortable life. When necessary, both traveled separately for work and would be away from home for a few days because of their professional lives. In one of her social media posts, Christine shared that she had to leave her dog at a pet hotel because she and Brendan would be traveling for work at the same time to different places. In another post, she mentioned that she had already arrived home, but was missing her husband since he hadn't returned yet. In October 2017, at the age of 32, Christine posted on her social media that she was 3 months pregnant. On March 30th, 2018, she gave birth to a girl. From then on, Christine began sharing her life as a mother on the internet, posting several photos of her daughter, and her husband. In 2019, the Banfield family decided to join the au pair program through the Culture Care Agency. For those unfamiliar with the au pair program, it is an exchange program where a person travels to another country to care for children and study in exchange for housing, meals, a salary, and travel opportunities. It is the most affordable exchange program available. The cost of the au pair program is much lower compared to other long-term exchange programs, and the person works as a nanny for a family. The nanny takes care of the family's children while living with them and receives other benefits, such as living in the United States legally and earning a salary to support themselves. In theory, both the family hiring the service and the person going is the nanny benefit. The family gets someone to help care for their children at a more affordable rate, while the nanny has the opportunity to study a new language, travel, and experience a different culture. Before the family finalizes any agreement with a potential nanny, an evaluation is made to check for compatibility. During this evaluation, the family conducts an interview with the person interested in becoming the nanny, asking questions to learn as much as possible about who will be living with them. If everything aligns, the nanny travels to the country where the family resides and moves in with them for a period of 1 to 2 years. The Banfields were looking for a trustworthy nanny to care for their daughter, which ultimately led to one of the most widely discussed crimes in the United States in recent days. In April 2019, a Brazilian woman named Amanda arrived in the United States through the au pair program and moved in with the Banfield family. After spending 2 years with the Banfields in April 2021, Amanda posted on her social media to thank them for the opportunity and announced she would stay for another 6 months. As I mentioned earlier, in the au pair program, the nanny can stay with the family for 1 to 2 years, but Amanda was granted an additional 6 months by the government due to the global health crisis, which resulted in restrictions. The relationship between Amanda and the Banfield family was very good. Both Amanda and the Banfields shared numerous photos on their social media, showing them all together enjoying trips, parties, birthdays, and dinners. During her time as an au pair nanny for the Banfield family, Amanda met a man in the United States with whom she started a relationship. Sometime later, Amanda and the man got engaged, and on September 25, 2021, they got married. In posts made on Amanda's social media, it's clear that the Banfields were actively involved in the ceremony and the celebration. In fact, the couple's daughter was the flower girl at Amanda's wedding. The relationship between Amanda and the Banfield family was so close that Christine referred to Amanda as part of the family. When Amanda's time in the au pair program ended at the Banfield home, she moved to another state with her husband. But even after moving, Amanda kept in touch with the Banfield family and visited them whenever she could. Since the experience of having a nanny through the au pair program had been very positive, the Banfields decided to search for another nanny through the program. Christine, who really wanted the new nanny to also be Brazilian, handled most of the process. It didn't take long for the family to find another person through the au pair program. Her name was Juliana Perez Magalhães, now 23 years old. Juliana, like Amanda, is Brazilian and lived in the state of São Paulo, Brazil. Juliana graduated in nursing in 2020, and shortly afterward, she began researching how the au pair program worked and how the interviews with families seeking nannies were conducted. On August 9, 2021, Juliana posted on her social media that she would be arriving in the United States in the coming months. She had an interview at the American consulate in Brazil on September 20th, and shortly afterward, she flew to the United States. Remembering that Amanda got married on September 25th, meaning that as soon as Amanda's au pair program ended, Juliana arrived in the United States and moved in with the family. At the time, Juliana had a boyfriend in Brazil and posted on her social media that he would visit her. She also posted in December 2021 that she had been in the United States for 2 months, but hadn't met many people, so she was looking for Brazilian friends to spend Christmas, New Year's, or go on trips with. After completing her first year in the au pair program with the Banfield family, Juliana extended the contract for another year. It's said that Juliana's relationship with the Banfields was good. It wasn't like Amanda's, but it was good. After all, if it hadn't been, the family likely wouldn't have wanted Juliana to stay for another year. Remembering that Juliana, like Christine, was also a nurse so professionally, they had something in common. On Juliana's social media, there were photos of her with the Banfield family, but they were fewer compared to the number of photos Amanda posted. I know this doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's just something I'm pointing out to complement the case. After all, many people with social media are more discreet and tend to post less. It varies from person to person. According to people close to the Banfield family, everything seemed to be going well with the new nanny, but it only seemed that way. On February 24, 2023, around 7:50 a.m., a call was made to 911 from Juliana's phone. But this call lasted only a few seconds and ended abruptly. About 13 minutes after this first call, a second call was made from Juliana's phone, and she told the police that a friend of hers was injured. At that same moment, according to sources, Brendan, Christine's husband, grabbed the phone and said he had found his wife with knife wounds in the bedroom and had shot a man named Ryan. The police acted quickly and arrived at the Banfield home in under 10 minutes. There, officers found a man already dead on the floor and Christine Banfield severely injured in an upstairs bedroom. Christine was rushed to the hospital while still alive. The couple's 4-year-old daughter was also in the house, and fortunately nothing bad happened to her. However, Christine Banfield did not survive her injuries and passed away at the hospital. Brendan also needed to go to the hospital due to a leg injury. Preliminary information released by the police indicated that the man found dead at the house was Joseph Ryan, 38 years old. He allegedly broke into the Banfield home and attacked Christine with a knife, only to be shot multiple times afterward. That was all that was known at that point. After being discharged from the hospital, Brendan refused to speak with the Fairfax County detectives or the media about what had happened at his home. Juliana, on the other hand, did the opposite. She spoke with the detectives and signed her statement to the police, sharing her version. Juliana told the detectives that on the morning of the incident, she arrived to work at the Banfield house and witnessed the moment Joseph Ryan broke in. She then, in panic, called Brendan, who wasn't home at that moment, and asked for help. Brendan allegedly told Juliana to calm down, as he would be home in a few minutes. Juliana reportedly waited outside the Banfield house for Brendan, claiming it was for her own safety. When Brendan arrived, he and Juliana entered the house, and it was then that they found Christine severely injured. In the midst of this, they encountered Joseph Ryan still inside the house and engaged in a physical struggle with him. Brendan managed to grab a weapon that was in the house and shot Joseph multiple times in the chest, with the man dying shortly afterward. Later, Brendan confirmed Juliana's version to the police, stating that he had fired on Joseph in self-defense. One strange detail is that in her statement, Juliana claimed that she arrived early at the Banfield house to work, but as we know in the au pair program, the nannies live with the family. Thus, it wasn't clear where Juliana was before arriving at the Banfield house. The crime shocked the town of Herndon, and when new revelations surfaced, the case made headlines across the United States. For months, the police did not release any details about the investigation, choosing to keep everything confidential. In the meantime, neighbors of the Banfield family said that Juliana continued to visit the house. It's unclear if she was living there, but according to neighbors, she was often seen with the Banfield's daughter, leading to speculation that she was still working as the nanny. In August 2023, Juliana posted on her social media, stating that she was looking for a new babysitting job in the area. It's against the rules of the au pair program to seek other work while enrolled, so it's likely that Juliana had left the program around that time. After more than 7 months of investigation, the police made progress in the case by collecting evidence and forensic findings. Juliana reportedly told her mother, who lives in Brazil, that the police had concluded their investigation and that Joseph Ryan had killed Christine Banfield due to a misunderstanding as they were lovers. On October 19, 2023, Juliana was arrested, and she was reportedly very surprised by this development. The reason for her arrest was that the police concluded that Juliana was the one who shot Joseph Ryan, not Brendan, as they had both previously claimed in their statements. The police also determined that at the time Juliana fired the shots, Brendan had not yet arrived at the Banfield house. After her arrest, Juliana Perez was charged with second-degree murder and taken to the Fairfax County Detention Center. At this point, public opinion largely sided with Juliana. Some people even called her a heroine, stating they would have done the same to defend the family that had given her an opportunity in the United States. Many expressed understanding for Brendan's actions in trying to protect Juliana by claiming he was the one who shot Joseph, as Juliana was a foreigner with a temporary permit to stay in the country, and this could have jeopardized her future. Initially, authorities confirmed to the media that Christine and Joseph Ryan had some sort of relationship, as there were no signs of forced entry into the house, implying that Joseph had been allowed inside by Christine. This was strange because in her call to Brendan in her police statement, Juliana said that Joseph had invaded the house. Another unclear detail was whether Juliana knew Joseph Ryan or had seen him before, with detectives investigating that possibility. At the time of Juliana's arrest, the chief of police stated that just because someone had been arrested, the case was closed. He emphasized that they would continue investigating thoroughly to put together all the pieces of the puzzle. It was also discovered that months before her arrest, Juliana had mentioned on social media that she was in a relationship with an American. Later it was discovered that the American Juliana had been referring to as Brendan Banfield, which of course made the case even more intriguing. When this information was released to the media, public opinion regarding Juliana changed. People who had supported her and seen her as a heroine began to question the entire story. Various theories emerged online, with the most prominent one suggesting that Brendan and Juliana had been having an affair for a long time and had planned the crime together. According to this theory, if Brendan divorced Christine, the couple's assets would have to be divided between them. To prevent this, he and Juliana allegedly staged the attack on Christine, with Joseph Ryan being used as a scapegoat. Another theory proposed that on the day of the crime, Brendan and Juliana were away together, and upon returning to the family home, they were confronted by Christine and Joseph Ryan. In this version, Joseph was a private detective hired by Christine to find out whether Brendan and Juliana were having an affair, something she had been suspicious of for months. As a result, a physical altercation ensued, and the two decided to eliminate Christine and Joseph in the process. There was also a theory suggesting that indeed Christine and Joseph were lovers, and when Brendan arrived home, he caught them in bed and ended up killing both of them. Juliana allegedly covered for Brendan, and afterward they began a relationship. These were some of the most circulated theories on the internet when the first details of the case began to surface. Shortly after Juliana's arrest, her mother gave an interview to a Brazilian newspaper. According to the mother of the accused, she was very worried because she had not yet been able to contact Juliana's lawyer in the United States. The woman said that her daughter planned to return to Brazil soon, as her permission visa to stay in the country was expiring. Juliana intended to renew her visa in Brazil, and after that return to the United States. The accused mother said she was very saddened by all the defamatory rumors that emerged on the internet about her daughter, and added that Juliana would never be capable of harming anyone. The article in the Brazilian newspaper concluded with Juliana's mother saying that she was hoping the case would be resolved as soon as possible. In her first hearing, Juliana told the judge that on that morning, Christine had given her tickets to the zoo to take the couple's 4-year-old daughter. Brendan wasn't home at that moment. According to Juliana, Christine did this to be alone at home to receive Joseph Ryan, whom she met through a dating website, according to Juliana. This was not a conventional dating site where people meet and all, but a site for those wanting to get straight to business. Juliana said that while she was on her way to the zoo with the daughter, she realized she had forgotten the girl's lunch. She then decided to return to the family's house to grab it. When she was approaching the house, she saw an unknown car parked in front of the garage, and then saw a man getting out of the car and entering the house. This man was Joseph Ryan. Juliana said she became scared not knowing the man, and thought he was a criminal breaking into the house. She then called Brendan to inform him about the situation. Brendan reportedly told Juliana to wait outside as he would be there in a few minutes. When Brendan arrived, they both entered the house together and Juliana made a 911 call, but hung up after a few seconds because she didn't know what to say on the phone. Juliana took the Banfield's daughter to the basement while Brendan drew his weapon and stayed on alert. A few seconds later, they heard noises coming from the bedroom upstairs. They went up to the room and found Joseph Ryan with a knife in hand on top of Christine. Christine was naked and Joseph was dressed. Brendan pointed the gun at Joseph and told him to drop the knife while Joseph told Brendan to drop the gun or he would attack Christine. At that moment, Joseph allegedly started stabbing Christine and Brendan shot at him. However, most of the shots missed Joseph, and he was not immediately neutralized and continued stabbing Christine. Brendan then shouted for Juliana to go to the bathroom where there was a safe and get his other weapon from inside it. When Juliana returned with the weapon, she didn't give it to Brendan. Instead, she shot Joseph, hitting him in the heart, a fatal shot. After that, they called 911 to report the incident. Juliana's defense stands by this version and claims she acted in self-defense. In the same hearing, the prosecution was also heard and presented an entirely different story. The prosecution stated that Brendan and Juliana had been having an affair for months, and that on the eve of the crime, Brendan didn't go to work that morning because everything had already been planned. Brendan left the house pretending to go to work, but actually went to a nearby location where he waited for Juliana's call. The prosecution claims that Joseph Ryan was lured to the Banfields' home, believing he was going to meet Christine. According to the prosecution, Brendan or Juliana created a fake profile of Christine on the dating website using her laptop from inside the family's house. On the dating site, Brendan or Juliana initiated communication with Joseph Ryan pretending to be Christine. In fact, the prosecution said these conversations were shown to Christine's family and friends, who stated that the conversation seemed very strange and that Christine didn't write like that. After some time of conversation, a meeting was arranged with Joseph Ryan, who received the day, time, and address of the Banfield family's home. On the arranged day when Joseph arrived at the house, he was allegedly greeted by Juliana, which is why there were no signs of forced entry, and shortly after he was ambushed by Brendan. For the prosecution, Brendan and Juliana planned everything for days and staged the entire crime scene. Their goal was to eliminate anyone in their way, in this case Christine, and with Christine out of the way, Brendan wouldn't have to divide the assets he had acquired with his wife in a divorce and could enjoy all the money alongside Juliana. An employee from a shooting ranch testified during the hearing and stated that Brendan and Juliana had been at the ranch 2 months before the events leading up to the crime. This same witness claimed that a month before the crime, Brendan went to the ranch alone and bought a Glock pistol at 7:17 p.m. paying $558.50. According to the police, this was the same gun that was in the safe and was used by Juliana to deliver the fatal shot to Joseph Ryan. Additionally, Brendan and Juliana swapped their mobile phones just 4 days before the crime. For the prosecutors, all of this was evidence that the two had been planning everything. During the hearing, the prosecutors presented photos of the house on the day of the crime and later showed new photos taken months after Juliana's arrest. In these photos, it was evident that the room that had previously belonged to Juliana in the house was empty, and all her belongings, such as clothes, makeup, and other items, were in the room Brendan had once shared with Christine, but was now sharing with Juliana. Moreover, all the pictures in the house that previously featured Brendan with Christine and their daughter were removed and replaced with photos of Brendan with Juliana and some with the daughter. The defense acknowledged a possible relationship between Brendan and Juliana, but reiterated that during the time she worked as a nanny for the family, she had other relationships, and what she had with Brendan was not serious. The defense also added that both Christine and Brendan had extramarital affairs and were unfaithful to each other. Brendan also spoke during the hearing, but he and his attorney stated they would invoke the Fifth Amendment. As a result, Brendan did not answer anything that could incriminate him and ended up responding to very few questions. At the end of the hearing, the prosecution requested that Juliana remain in custody due to the high risk of flight. The prosecution mentioned that Juliana had attempted to obtain another passport when authorities had withheld her passport during the ongoing investigation before her arrest. In response, Juliana's defense argued that they themselves had instructed her to apply for another passport because she needed an ID to stay in the country, and when she asked the authorities to return her passport, they did not. Therefore, according to the defense, Juliana's attempt to obtain another passport had nothing to do with an escape plan. In the end, the presiding judge accepted the prosecution's request and decided that Juliana Perez should remain in custody without the possibility of bail until her trial date. Brendan Robert Banfield continued to be investigated by the police and remained free. As I mentioned earlier, he initially refused to speak with detectives or the media, and one of the first things he did was hire an attorney. Initially, when he decided to speak with the police, he claimed that he was the one who shot Joseph Ryan. However, after evidence showed that it was Juliana who fired the shot, Brendan changed his story. According to sources, Brendan's daughter with Christine was placed in the care of family members while the investigation continued. At this point, the only information made public about Joseph Ryan was that he was 38 years old and had a profile on the dating site where he communicated with Christine's profile. On September 16, 2024, after months of further investigation, the police arrested Brendan Banfield. He was charged with first-degree murder for the deaths of both Christine and Joseph Ryan. Prosecutors accused Brendan of conspiring to kill both of them in the residence where he lived with his wife. He was also charged with the use of a firearm in the commission of a crime. The police did not release specific details about the evidence they had gathered to prove that Brendan conspired to kill his wife and Joseph Ryan. The only thing they stated was that Brendan and Juliana had a planned trip to Brazil. A few days later, Brendan Banfield's first hearing took place. During this hearing, authorities revealed that Brendan began a relationship with Juliana in August 2022. Juliana had arrived at the Banfield family home to work as a nanny in September 2021, and at that time she was dating a guy who had stayed in Brazil. It was also revealed that 1 month before the crime, Brendan and Juliana traveled together to New York, where they stayed in a hotel and attended a show. During the hearing, Brendan said that on the morning of the crime, he left the house around 7:11 a.m. and made a stop at a McDonald's about 8 minutes from his home by car. According to him, he would often stop there for breakfast when heading to work. Brendan said that around 7:37 a.m., he received a call from Juliana telling him that an unknown man had broken into the family home. He then, without finishing his breakfast, rushed back to his house. The prosecution played the recording of the first 911 call Juliana made. In the recording, Joseph Ryan can be heard groaning in pain in the background. The call lasted 8 seconds before Juliana hung up. The Fairfax County Police Department dispatcher called Juliana back following protocol, but no one answered. When questioned about this, Brendan said the call was not answered because he and Juliana couldn't find the phone, which had fallen somewhere in the house. Brendan also said that at that same moment, he told Juliana to grab his other gun from the bathroom safe because Joseph Ryan was still alive and could pose a threat. But when she returned with the gun, instead of handing it to Brendan, Juliana shot Joseph, hitting him in the heart. There were 13 minutes between the first and second calls Juliana made to 911. To the authorities, 13 minutes was an unusually long time for Brendan and Juliana to call the police again. Joseph Ryan was already injured before the first call, so it made no sense for them to take 13 minutes to call back. The prosecutor in the case stated that Joseph Ryan's body had been moved to make it appear as though he was actually attacking Christine. Authorities confirmed that the knife used in the crime indeed belonged to Joseph Ryan, and that he had brought it in a backpack. As in his conversations with Christine, she had asked him to bring the knife due to a fetish involving pain and pleasure. To explain further, the website where the supposed Christine communicated with Joseph Ryan was a platform for casual encounters focusing on fetishes involving pain and pleasure. That's why Joseph Ryan brought a knife to his meeting with Christine at the Banfield house, which, according to authorities, was quite convenient for someone staging a crime scene afterward. According to paramedics who responded to the scene, both Christine and Joseph had been moved and repositioned. Joseph's arms were covered in blood, apparently Christine's blood, and they were crossed in a way that he could not have done himself after being fatally shot in the chest. The paramedics also stated that while working to try to save Christine, Brendan never once asked about her condition or if she was going to be okay. Instead, he asked about Joseph Ryan, questioning the paramedics if the man was still alive. Authorities believe Brendan's concern for Joseph was because if Joseph remained alive, he would certainly tell the truth about what really happened. Additionally, evidence from blood spatter analysis in the room indicates that both Christine and Joseph had been moved before the paramedics arrived. The prosecutor stated in Brendan's hearing that in August, the police received 2 definitive reports from forensic investigators specializing in blood spatter analysis. These reports were crucial in supporting the theory that the bodies of Joseph Ryan and Christine were moved and repositioned after they had been fatally injured. Days before the crime, Joseph Ryan allegedly told a friend about Christine, claiming that her marriage was not monogamous and that both she and Brendan were seeing other people with each other's consent. This statement from Joseph was based on his conversations with Christine online. In one of these conversations, Joseph Ryan reportedly sent Christine photos of the items he was bringing to their meeting, which included the knife, cuffs, and belts. Joseph allegedly mentioned that he would use the knife to cut Christine's pajamas. The police later found a woman's pajama cut in the room where the crime took place, though it wasn't immediately clear if Joseph had been the one to cut it. Joseph Ryan was known to share almost everything with his friends regarding the encounters he arranged through the website. During interviews with some of these friends, police discovered that Joseph had never spoken to Christine over the phone or in a video call. He had never heard her voice before the day of the crime. Why is this important? As mentioned earlier, authorities believe that the profile supposedly belonging to Christine on the site was actually created by someone else, likely Brendan or Juliana. If Joseph had spoken to Christine by phone, following the theory that she was not the one behind the profile, it would likely have been Juliana pretending to be Christine. However, Juliana has a strong Brazilian accent, which Joseph would likely have noticed and possibly mentioned to his friends. Given this, authorities believe that, aside from the text messages, Joseph never communicated with Christine in any other way. Friends of Joseph who were interviewed by the police also mentioned that he was never violent, and they did not believe he would have harmed Christine. From the day Juliana was arrested on October 19, 2023 until her arrest on September 16, 2024, Brendan Banfield maintained constant contact with her. In one of their recorded conversations, Juliana allegedly said, "I hope you're not with me just because you're afraid I'll turn against you." Brendan reportedly told her to shut up. Brendan's trial was scheduled for February 2025, while Juliana's was set for November 12th of the same year. However, in late October 2024, to avoid a public trial, Juliana decided to strike a plea deal with the prosecution. As part of the deal, Juliana pleaded guilty to manslaughter and agreed to testify against Brendan during his trial in February 2025. The prosecutor indicated that Juliana's sentencing would only take place after Brendan's trial concluded, as her testimony would impact both the judge's decision and her own sentence. Authorities managed to piece together a timeline of events based on evidence in Juliana's confession. According to them, in August 2022, Brendan Banfield began an extramarital affair with Juliana Perez. In the fall of 2023, Brendan reportedly told Juliana that he wanted to get rid of his wife, Christine, and soon after, he started planning the crime. Brendan then created a fake profile for Christine on an adult dating site, primarily used for fetishes and fantasies involving pleasure and pain. Through this profile, Brendan communicated with various men, eventually starting a conversation with Joseph Ryan. After some time, Brendan arranged a meeting with Joseph at the Banfield family home on February 24, 2023. Joseph Ryan believed he was communicating with Christine Banfield and that he would meet her in person. In their conversations, where Brendan posed as Christine, he told Joseph that she wanted him to bring a knife and other items to the meeting, as she was interested in exploring some fantasies. A few days before the meeting, Brendan asked Juliana to speak with Joseph via voice call on Telegram, pretending to make everything seem more convincing. It is unclear whether Joseph noticed Juliana's Brazilian accent during the call. If he did, he didn't mention it to any of his friends. It's possible that Brendan fabricated a story to explain the accent, perhaps claiming that Christine had ties to Brazil or had lived there for a significant time. As Brendan and Juliana had planned everything in advance, they likely devised a way to cover up this detail. During her confession, Juliana told authorities that she did not want to be involved in the crime. She reportedly told Brendan that she didn't think he would go that far, but when she realized he was serious, she attempted to back out. However, Brendan allegedly told her it was too late to turn back. On the morning of February 24, 2023, Brendan gave Juliana a firearm. He had purchased the weapon on January 28, 2023. The plan was that as soon as Juliana saw Joseph Ryan entering the Banfield family home, she would first call Christine and then call Brendan, telling them that a strange man had entered the house and that she was very scared. Juliana followed the plan, making both calls as soon as she saw Joseph Ryan enter the house. The call to Christine's phone went to voicemail because before leaving the house that morning, Brendan had turned off his wife's phone and hidden it in a kitchen drawer. As planned, Brendan waited for Juliana's call at a nearby McDonald's, allowing him to return home quickly. When Juliana called, Brendan also attempted to call Christine, but as he expected, the call went straight to voicemail. Brendan returned home, picked up Juliana and their daughter, and they entered through the basement. They left the child in the basement and went up to Brendan's bedroom, where he lived with Christine. Brendan was carrying his service weapon, and Juliana had the gun he had purchased in January and given to her that morning. When they entered the room, Joseph was holding Christine, and Brendan shouted that he was the police before shooting Joseph Ryan in the head. The impact of the shot caused Joseph to fall away from Christine. After the shot, Juliana called 911. The call was brief, but Joseph's groaning could be heard in the background. Juliana ended the call, following Brendan's instructions, and shortly after, Brendan grabbed the knife Joseph had brought for the meeting and began stabbing Christine multiple times. The 911 operator tried to call back, but Juliana did not answer. Then Juliana went to the house's safe, opened it, and made it seem like she had retrieved the gun from the safe, when in fact she already had it with her from the beginning. Upon returning to the room, Juliana noticed that Joseph was still moving. She then shot him in the heart, delivering a fatal blow, as confirmed by the medical examiner. After Brendan staged the crime scene, placing the bodies of Christine and Joseph near each other to make it appear as though Joseph had attacked Christine, he instructed Juliana to call 911 again. In this second call, Juliana claimed that an intruder had broken into the Banfield house and attacked Christine. When the police and paramedics arrived, Brendan went to the hospital with Christine, while Juliana went to the police department with the couple's daughter. The rest of the story is now well known. An important detail is that when Brendan and Juliana went upstairs, Joseph was holding Christine, who was naked. This occurred because, as revealed by the conversations between Brendan, pretending to be Christine, and Joseph, they had discussed a fantasy in which Christine would be dominated by someone entering her home with a knife and cutting her pajamas. As was discovered, Christine's pajama was found cut near the bed. So when Joseph entered the house, he believed he was participating in a fantasy, and Christine, unaware of the true intentions, likely tried to ask him to stop. However, Joseph thought this was part of the act, as they had discussed in their messages. With Juliana Perez's confession, there is no longer any doubt that the crime was a conspiracy orchestrated by her and Brendan to take Christine's life and allow them to be together. Brendan Banfield's trial is scheduled for February 2025, and Juliana's sentencing will be announced shortly after his trial concludes. The judge presiding over the case, Penny Ascarati, who also oversaw the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial, is the same judge handling Brendan's case, creating great anticipation with millions of people awaiting the outcome. Joseph Ryan's mother has not given any interviews so far to avoid interfering with the investigation, but when Brendan was arrested, she posted on social media saying that it was very difficult to live without her only son, and that the only thing that still made her get out of bed every day was the hope that justice would be served. Both Christine's and Brendan's families are deeply shocked by everything that has happened. According to the latest information, the couple's daughter, now 6 years old, is under the guardianship of close relatives. Case 4. Mike Mansholt was born on August 20th, 1998 in Oldenburg, a city in Germany with a population of over 160,000 people. He was the son of Bernd Mansholt and Susan Mansholt. Mike's parents were financially stable, which allowed him to have a comfortable childhood. He was described as a very active child who loved adventure. When he was still young, his parents, who were facing some marital issues, decided to get a divorce. After the separation, Mike stayed with his mother. Later, Suzanne, Mike's mother, started a new relationship and had a daughter named Maria. Bernd, Mike's father, also found a new partner and had a son named Daniel. It is said that Mike got along very well with both Maria and Daniel. In fact, he had always wanted siblings to play with so he wouldn't feel lonely, just like most children. From a very young age, Mike developed a passion for traveling. He inherited this from his father, who took him on trips to various places, including Iceland, Scotland, and the Caribbean. They even crossed the Atlantic Ocean on a sailboat, a journey that lasted over 700 days and became an unforgettable adventure for them. Mike's father described him as a kind and polite boy who, despite his adventurous spirit, was a very calm person. In July 2016, Mike decided to take a trip to Malta. This was his first time traveling alone, without his parents, siblings, or even friends. Mike went to Malta to meet his girlfriend, who was taking a language course in the country. Since he was on vacation, he wanted to take the opportunity to spend some time with her. For those who don't know, Malta is an archipelago in the Mediterranean Sea, located 58 miles south of the island of Sicily, Italy. The country has a population of around 500,000 and a territory of 122 square miles. It is a beautiful destination that attracts thousands of tourists every year. Summer is the peak tourist season, as temperatures are considered high by European standards, often reaching around 90 degrees. This makes the country's stunning beaches incredibly crowded, crime rates are very low, and the island is also known as a major tax haven. Some might find it unusual that Mike's parents allowed him to travel alone at just 16 years old. However, according to his family, he had already traveled to almost every corner of the world and had gained a lot of experience. He knew how to handle situations that most people wouldn't, and he was also a very responsible young man. Mike arrived in Malta on July 8, 2016, specifically in Valletta, the country's capital, where he met up with his girlfriend. The two spent the next few days together, enjoying themselves and exploring the country. However, as the date to return to Germany approached, Mike decided he wanted to stay a few more days in Malta. So Mike's girlfriend returned to Germany alone, and he informed his parents that he would stay a bit longer to explore the island. Suzanne, Mike's mother, was at home in Germany, and Bernd, his father, was on vacation with his family in Croatia. Neither parent minded that Mike wanted to stay a few more days in Malta, so they approved his request. Mike stayed at a hotel in the city of Slima. Slima is located on Malta's northeast coast in the Northern Harbor District. It is an important residential and commercial area, as well as a shopping hub with bars, restaurants, and cafes. It is also the most densely populated city on the island. The hotel where Mike stayed is called Astra. Security camera footage from the hotel shows Mike leaving on the morning of July 18th. He left his room 105, around 8:39 a.m. At 9:10 a.m., he went to the hotel reception to ask for some information and chatted briefly with the staff. After that, Mike returned to his room where he stayed for almost an hour. He left his room in the hotel around 9:55 a.m. In the hotel security footage, you can see Mike wearing a blue t-shirt, carrying a black backpack over his shoulder, and holding a cell phone. Inside his backpack, Mike had packed a GoPro camera, a portable charger, documents, a credit card, and money. The day was hot and sunny, and Mike wanted to make the most of it. After leaving the hotel, Mike walked to a nearby port where he rented a mountain bike for the day. The bike he rented was a Lombardo in blue and black. At 10:11 a.m., Mike sent a voice message to his father on WhatsApp. In the message, Mike told his father that he had rented a bike and would be cycling around Malta that day, but that the roads were quite steep in some areas, so he would have to walk pushing the bike. He also mentioned that he would send a photo soon, but he never sent the photo, and that was the last time Bernd heard from his son. Although Mike didn't get in touch with his family afterward, they didn't suspect that something might have happened. To them, Mike was simply busy exploring the island that had captivated him. On July 22nd, Suzanne and Maria, Mike's mother and sister, went to the airport and waited for him there. Mike was supposed to have landed at that airport on that day, but he didn't show up. At first, Mike's mother and sister thought he might have landed in Frankfurt, where he would have had a layover. Susan then tried calling her son's phone, but it was turned off. She tried to reach him several times, but all her attempts failed. She then decided to contact the airline responsible for the flight Mike was supposed to take to Germany. That's when she discovered that Mike had never boarded the plane. After this discovery, Susan went straight to the police and reported her son's disappearance around 2 a.m. on July 23rd. The German police treated the case as high priority, and the officers quickly contacted the Maltese police. One of the German detectives received information that the Maltese police had already been searching for Mike for at least 2 days. Mike had not been seen on the island since the morning of July 18th, when he rented the mountain bike that he was supposed to return the following day, but never did. It was the manager of the Astra Hotel who reported Mike's disappearance to the Maltese authorities on July 20th. Mike was supposed to return to the hotel to collect his belongings and check out, but he never showed up. It had been 4 days since Mike was last seen by anyone, and the Maltese police were already searching for him in the area. In the meantime, no one from Malta contacted Mike's family in Germany to inform them about the situation. Some sources say it was because the authorities didn't have the contact details of Mike's family, while other sources claim it was due to negligence. In any case, when Bernd, Mike's father, found out about his son's disappearance, he paused his vacation and took the first available flight to Malta with Daniel, Mike's brother. Despite the situation, Bernd tried to remain calm. He kept trying to think of all the possible reasons why his son hadn't caught the flight he was supposed to take. He thought that perhaps Mike had missed the flight, maybe lost his phone, or perhaps his phone had been stolen. The family tried to stay optimistic throughout and believed that Mike would show up at any moment. What worried Bernd the most was the fact that Mike's phone was turned off. Bernd stayed in constant contact with the Maltese authorities and actively assisted in the search for his son. The police checked all the islands of Malta and looked into whether Mike had taken any local ferry or small aircraft. Thousands of flyers were distributed across various locations in the country, and all tips from informants were followed up on. Mike's mother stayed in Germany, but was kept informed about the progress of the search for her son. On July 24, 2016, Interpol joined the case, and the investigation became international, with Germany and Malta cooperating in the effort to find the boy. On July 26, 8 days after his disappearance, the Maltese police received an anonymous tip about Mike. The source of this tip was never made public, and it is also unknown if the police ever discovered the identity of the person who made the call. The caller said that Mike was in an area with cliffs on the island's west coast. These cliffs, known as Dingley Cliffs, reach a height of approximately 820 feet. The place is quite popular with tourists, as it is the highest point on the island and offers a stunning view of the Mediterranean Sea. These cliffs are located near the catacombs of Rabat, another very popular tourist site on the island. The man who rented the bike to Mike told the police that they had a brief conversation in which the teenager mentioned wanting to visit these catacombs. It was therefore highly likely that Mike passed through this area. A police team with sniffer dogs, firefighters and paramedics was sent to the cliff area to conduct the search. Mike's father and brother quickly made their way to the site, and when they arrived, some journalists were already there waiting to ask them questions. Shortly after, emergency teams and even an ambulance arrived at the location. After a few hours of searching, the sniffer dogs detected something nearby, but the authorities asked Bernd and Daniel to stay back and wait so they wouldn't interfere with the professionals. And soon came the news no one wanted to hear. Mike was found, but he was lifeless. Mike's body was found at the bottom of the cliffs, hidden under some bushes in a rock outcrop. The location was not easy to access and could not be seen from the cliffs. This explained why no one had seen Mike there, despite the area being frequented by many tourists. The bike that Mike had rented was found hanging about 98 feet above his body. It was severely damaged, with a flat tire and the handlebars completely bent. The police removed Mike's body from the site and sent it for an autopsy. The officers also collected some of the victim's items found at the location and sent them for analysis. Mike's sneakers and sunglasses were found near his body. For some reason, he was barefoot. The backpack that Mike had taken from the hotel, containing several of his belongings such as his phone, laptop, GoPro camera, money and credit card, was nowhere to be found. Something strange found near the body was fresh hay, which hadn't yet been affected by the sun. It appeared as though someone had stepped on the hay, and it had detached from the sole of their shoe, leaving it on the ground. It couldn't have been Mike, as he was barefoot and his sneakers were found several feet away from his body. The police spoke with a farmer who owned property near the area where Mike's body was found, asking him if he knew anything about the hay. The farmer simply replied that he knew nothing. Bernd, Mike's father, also spoke with the farmer and asked if he had seen Mike nearby or if he knew where the boy's backpack might be. According to Bernd, the farmer acted strangely, as if he didn't want to cooperate or answer the questions. It seemed like he was uncomfortable and kept insisting that he knew nothing. Bernd was devastated after discovering what had happened to his son, but he tried to stay strong in order to uncover what had truly happened. Daniel was deeply affected by the loss of his brother. They were very close, and they had plans to travel the world together when they grew older, but that would no longer be possible. When Suzanne received the news about her son, she couldn't believe it. It was something she had never imagined. Maria, too, was devastated by the loss of her brother. They had been together their whole lives, and now she would never see him again. Mike's girlfriend, who had already arrived in Germany a few days earlier, was deeply shaken by the news. She had been with him recently and couldn't wait for him to return home so they could see each other again. The case caused a huge uproar in Malta, as such an event was highly unusual for the island. It also gained significant attention in Germany, as the entire family was from there. During the investigation, many strange things began to happen. Mike used to film and take photos of almost every part of his trip to Malta, so finding his GoPro would have given the police a solid starting point for their investigation. Assuming Mike had filmed his entire journey that day, having the GoPro could have helped solve the case quickly. When Mike's body was found, the police in Malta cataloged and collected 3 items that belonged to him and were found near his body: his pair of sneakers, his sunglasses, and the GoPro case that Mike had been carrying. This case was attached to Mike's belt, but it's unclear whether he had the camera with him or if it was empty, as it mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. When the police were collecting Mike's body, Bernd asked them about the GoPro. The lead investigator allegedly told him that she had seen the GoPro case attached to Mike's belt, and it had been catalogued and collected by the other officers. This same lead investigator was the one who stood guard over Mike's body until everything was collected. One of the first things Bernd did upon arriving in Malta was go to the Astra Hotel, where Mike had stayed. At the hotel, room 105, Mike's room, had already been emptied and cleaned by the staff. All of Mike's belongings in the room were handed over to Bernd, but the GoPro case was not among them. This meant that Mike had likely taken the case with him, and the camera was probably inside the case that had been attached to Mike's belt when his body was found. Baird knew how valuable the GoPro was, as Mike had filmed almost everything, and the footage on the camera could probably shed light on what had happened to him. However, the day after the body and items were collected, all the police officers involved in the investigation denied that there had been a camera case attached to the victim's belt. They claimed that nothing of the sort had been cataloged or collected. Baird found this hard to believe, especially since the lead investigator herself had mentioned seeing the case on Mike's belt. Baird then spoke to the lead investigator who, like the other officers involved in the case, denied ever seeing the case or having collected it. That same day, the police declared that Mike had fallen from the cliff while riding his bike. However, the way Mike's body was found made it difficult to imagine that he had simply fallen, as the police suggested. If Mike had truly fallen while riding his bike, he would have fallen straight down. The location where Mike's body was found suggested that he had fallen backward, which would be highly unlikely in a natural fall. However, the police quickly declared that Mike's death was an accident, stating that he had fallen from more than 30 meters high and then rolled to the spot where the body was found. The coroner in charge of Mike's body analysis told Baird that Mike hadn't suffered, as he had broken his neck in 2 places during the fall, resulting in nearly instant death. However, at that point, an X-ray had not yet been done on Mike's body. So, it remains unclear if the coroner was able to make this assessment just by looking at and touching Mike's body, or if this was simply a lie. The autopsy report was finalized only a month later, confirming through DNA testing that the body was indeed Mike Mansholt's. According to the report, Mike had been dead for about 8 days when his body was discovered. This suggested that he died the same day he left the hotel to explore the island on his bike. The autopsy also concluded that Mike had no broken bones, which was extremely strange. If he had truly fallen from a height of more than 98 feet and struck the rocks of the cliff, he would have at least broken an arm. This finding contradicted what the coroner had told Baird, claiming that Mike had broken his neck in 2 places and didn't suffer. Mike had no broken bones, which meant the coroner's statement was a lie. A forensic examination was conducted on the bike Mike had rented, and the conclusion was that its condition didn't match what one would expect from a fall of 98 feet or more from a cliff. A few days before the official autopsy report was finalized and released to the family, an employee from the morgue who had been responsible for Mike's body approached Baird to talk. She told Baird that everything seemed very strange. Mike had no broken bones, which contradicted the official version of the police that Mike had fallen from the cliff while riding his bike. She suggested that Baird think about what to do next, as it appeared that the police had no interest in pursuing the case further. After hearing this, Baird went to speak with the head of the investigation, the same person who had claimed to have seen the GoPro case and later denied it. This time, she refused to speak and dodged Baird's questions, which only made him more suspicious. Baird continued pressing the authorities about his son's GoPro, and a few days later the forensic department of Malta handed him a digital camera, claiming it was Mike's. The camera they handed Baird was a Canon model from the early days of digital photography, a far cry from the GoPro Hero 2 Mike had been using. Along with the camera, Baird was also given a memory card that was completely destroyed, and the authorities claimed it had been inside the camera when it was found next to the body. Baird knew right away that this was not his son's camera. He believed the authorities had handed it to him, hoping he would stop asking about the real GoPro. By this point, Mike's family had grown very suspicious of the Malta police, and were trying to understand why they seemed completely uninterested in the case. It was beginning to look like the Maltese authorities were trying to hide something. Baird questioned some of the police officers about who might have stolen his son's belongings. Some officers responded by saying that no one from Malta would steal items from a body, suggesting that perhaps a tourist had taken them instead. The police also claimed to have tried pulling location records from Mike's phone carrier, but stated that they found nothing, no records at all. Frustrated with the inconsistencies and lack of interest from the Maltese authorities in pursuing the investigation, Baird was ready to make serious accusations. However, he had to return to Germany first to arrange his son's funeral and deal with other matters. Mike's body arrived in Germany on August 17, 2016, and it was at this point that new discoveries were made, adding to the mystery of the case. The funeral home staff, responsible for preparing Mike's body for burial, noticed some strange things. Mike's body seemed completely deflated, as if it were empty. Furthermore, he hadn't been embalmed or prepared for burial, which was problematic, as the investigation into his death was still ongoing. The fact that the Maltese authorities had not embalmed Mike's body created a serious issue for the German authorities, who couldn't properly conduct a second autopsy. The body smelled of decomposition, not formaldehyde or other preservation chemicals, as it should have. Upon noticing this, the funeral home staff immediately reported the issue to the German authorities. A police officer mentioned to the staff that the agents responsible for handling Mike's coffin, when it arrived at the airport, had noticed that the coffin seemed too light. Due to all these suspicions, Mike's body was sent to the Medical University of Hanover for further analysis. There, it was found that the body weighed only 16 kilograms, and upon opening it, it was discovered that all of his organs had been removed. The brain, heart, lungs, liver, pancreas, adrenal glands, right kidney, bladder, prostate, stomach, intestines, and other organs were missing. Only small fragments remained of the left kidney, diaphragm, spleen, and colon. This explained why Mike's body was so deflated and weighed only 35 pounds. It is normal for the main organs to be removed during an autopsy for further investigation. When this happens, the body is filled with other materials such as sawdust or cotton. Alternatively, the organs that were removed are placed back once the autopsy is finished. If the organs are not returned, a report must be made to explain the reason, which was not done here. And of course, the body is never left in a vacuum like Mike's was. Mike's family was shocked when they learned that nearly all of his organs were missing from his body. Bernd even wrote a letter to the authorities in Malta, pleading for them to send his son's organs back so he could bury them with his child. A coroner from Malta responded to Bernd, claiming that Mike's organs had been eaten by animals before his body was found. This made no sense at all, since the initial autopsy report from Malta did not show any injuries that could be attributed to animals. Mike's body showed no visible wounds or bite marks from animals, for example. The public prosecutor's office of Oldenburg, the city where the family lived in Germany, decided to seize the body. What had initially been a case of a missing person found dead became a case of potential crime. As a result, the German authorities launched an investigation into Mike Manschultz's death. The forensic doctors at the University of Hanover, who were responsible for analyzing Mike's body and discovered the absence of almost all his organs, requested a copy of the autopsy report carried out by the Maltese authorities, but they never received it. The forensic doctors stated that due to the lack of organs in the body, a second autopsy would provide very limited results that could not be compared with the results of the first autopsy. Later, Mike's parents filed a formal complaint against the Maltese authorities through their lawyers. In their communication, the victim's parents stated that during an email exchange with the coroner from Malta who performed the first autopsy on Mike, the man claimed that their son's organs had been eaten by rodents and that his brain had liquefied. Bernd and Suzanne decided to take the matter to court, requesting an investigation into how Mike's organs had disappeared. The German public prosecutors began working on the case and started to suspect that Mike may have been murdered. They also concluded that the Maltese coroners had done a very poor job. It was ordered that a new autopsy be performed on Mike's body, even though the body's condition was no longer the same as when it was first found, which would impair the report. This time, the Maltese coroners had to be present during the new autopsy to ensure legal security. No bite marks were found on the body, and there was no evidence of rodent activity, except for a small bite on the neck and an abrasion on the forearm. The possibility of rodents eating Mike's organs was completely ruled out. It was also reconfirmed that his body was intact when it was taken from the beach under the cliffs to the Maltese morgue with no wounds or bite marks. But the most important findings from this autopsy were that the body had not been embalmed in Malta, and as a result, it was too decomposed to determine the cause of death. There had been no proper embalming performed by the Maltese coroner. Thus, the last traces that could have helped determine the cause of death were lost forever. Another significant conclusion from the German authorities was that there was no evidence suggesting that Mike died from the 30-meter fall or more from the cliffs. The Germans also discovered that there were no major wounds found on Mike's skin. He had no broken bones, no broken ribs, no damage to soft tissues, and no bruises. Mike's spine was intact. Internal bleeding couldn't be ruled out or confirmed because there were no organs to investigate. In any case, the German authorities considered this possibility to be low, as internal bleeding would have been accompanied by bruising or external damage, which was not found on Mike. A fall from more than 98 feet was considered virtually impossible, especially since the victim had no broken bones. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the possibility of murder was not ruled out. Despite these conclusions by the German authorities, the Maltese authorities maintained their version that Mike died in a tragic accident from falling off a cliff. In the first autopsy performed on Mike's body at the beginning of the investigation by the Maltese, 3 people were present, including the country's chief forensic doctor, Professor Mario Seri. He is a highly respected man in Malta, having received several awards for his work. Dr. Mario was present at the site where the body was found and also conducted the autopsy. However, when Bernd and journalists asked for additional information, he refused to provide further details. He only responded to one email from Bernd, stating that the organs were already missing before the autopsy and had been eaten by rodents, and that the brain had dissolved in the sun. He also mentioned that he had shared this information with the head of the investigation in Malta. The German forensic team contradicted Dr. Mario Seri's report, stating in writing that no bite marks were found on Mike's body. Regarding the claim that the brain liquefied due to the sun, they called it absurd, noting that in many countries, temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius in the summer, the same temperature as in Malta that day, and there are no reports of anything like this happening elsewhere. Officially, Dr. Mario documented that Mike's body was found lying on his back. However, the German authorities did not believe that Mike had died in the exact spot where the body was found. They theorized that if he had really fallen, he could still have been alive when he hit the beach and then managed to crawl to a shaded area under the cliff. Asphyxiation could also not be ruled out as the cause of death by the German authorities because Mike's hyoid bone was also missing. In November 2017, Bernd returned to Malta. He tried to speak with the police and detectives who worked on his son's case, but they refused to talk. Bernd then filed a legal request to access all the case files, but he was informed that the judge was ill, and furthermore, the judge had a reputation for being slow in approving judicial decisions. Bernd only gained access to these files thanks to a German diplomat in Malta who managed to obtain the documents. However, the official file was missing several important documents that the Maltese authorities claimed to have lost, such as the autopsy results and photos of the location where Mike was found. In January 2018, the Maltese government caved to the pressure from the German authorities and reopened Mike's case. Finally, all the efforts of the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs bore fruit. Shortly after this, the first documents regarding Mike's case arrived in Germany. The German media began to cover the entire story again, and the parliament started to debate the issue. However, the new judge assigned to the case also determined that Mike's death was due to him falling from a cliff, meaning there were no updates in the case. On the other hand, the German authorities concluded that there were many inconsistencies in the case, but with the limited material they had to investigate, they found themselves at a dead end and could do nothing. Almost everyone who analyzes this case, full of gaps and with such careless files, from diplomats and investigators to journalists, has doubts about the official verdict of the Maltese authorities. Bernd Mansholt grew tired and discouraged by all the negligence. He decided to stop pushing for more answers about Mike's death, and now focuses on his family. He believes that we will never know what really happened to his son. A German newspaper that had covered this case from the beginning tried to do a new story about it, but when they contacted the Maltese authorities, they refused to comment on the case. It seems that no one who worked on Mike Mansholt's case is interested in talking about it, as if they were trying to cover it all up. This case is full of mysteries and theories surrounding it. Among the most famous theories is the one suggesting that Mike may have been a victim of organ trafficking. Mike was a very healthy boy, and the absence of all of his main organs makes some people suspect he was a victim of organ theft. According to this theory, Mike might have been approached by organ traffickers while cycling through a remote area of Malta. The traffickers would have taken him to a place where they removed his organs, then stitched his body back up and threw him off the cliff along with his bike to make it look like an accident. Maltese authorities might have discovered everything but decided to cover it up, as the country heavily relies on tourism, and such an event would undoubtedly scare tourists away, causing significant economic loss. People who believe in this theory think the farmer, who owns a property near where Mike's body was found, might be involved in the case. His evasiveness when questioned by the victim's father, as if hiding something, was very suspicious. Another widely circulated theory is that Mike was a victim of thieves who took his belongings and then threw him off the cliff. In this theory, Mike would have been strangled, and then his body was placed in the location where it was found. To cover up the case and prevent damage to the island's tourism, the authorities decided to remove the hyoid bone the brain, and several other organs from Mike. If Mike had indeed been strangled, this could only be determined by examining the state of the hyoid bone in the brain. Since the Maltese authorities wanted to suppress the case, they simply decided to make all this evidence disappear. There's also the theory that Mike fell off the cliff on his own, and some people who passed by and saw the body took the opportunity to steal his backpack, which contained several of his belongings. The last theory I found, though less accepted, is that Mike may have taken his own life. This theory was discarded early in the investigation, as there were no signs from Mike that would suggest he was planning something like that. Everything points to Mike being happy, full of plans, in love, and showing no signs of mental illness or depression. The case of Mike Mansholt is one of the most mysterious and gap-filled cases ever documented. To this day, the authorities in Malta maintain their official version that Mike fell off the cliff on his own, and claim that any version beyond that is simply a conspiracy theory. Case 5. June is a determined woman who goes to great lengths to solve any mystery that comes her way. The game's environments are beautifully crafted, and there's a wide variety of characters. In addition, you can join clubs within the game to play with your family and friends. The atmosphere and plot are designed to truly transport you to the 1920s, the time period in which the story takes place, giving the game a very special feel. New chapters are released every week, so you'll never get bored as the game always brings something new. The best part is that the challenges really sharpen your detective skills. I'm sure you'll spend hours having fun and relaxing. I really enjoyed the game and play whenever I have time. The game is free and you can download it through my QR code, which is on the screen, or via the link I'll leave in my pinned comment. You can play it both on your phone and on your computer or laptop. Come on everyone, let's show some support for the sponsor of this channel. Thank you so much for your support, June's Journey. In the early hours of November 25th to 26, 2022, the couple Leslie Hurlbeak and Kevin Trompat mysteriously vanished. Leslie was 22 years old and Kevin was 21. At the time of their disappearance, they were spending a few days at a friend's house in the small commune of Prahak, a place where almost everyone knows each other, as it has just over 2,000 residents. Prahak is part of the Deux-Sèvres department, located in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region of France. It's known as a peaceful area with beautiful landscapes and a welcoming community, the kind of place people move to when they're looking for a quieter life. However, the chilling case I'm about to tell you left a dark stain on the memories of those who lived there. As soon as the young couple's families lost contact with them, they felt that something was terribly wrong. It was completely out of character for the two to go off the grid, let alone disappear without saying a word. Because of this, the families immediately contacted the authorities and reported them missing. During the investigation, police discovered that the couple had arrived in Prahak on November 25th, around 5:30 p.m. They were supposed to spend the night at the home of a man named Nicholas Renew, a friend of Kevin's. Before that, the couple had dropped off some of their belongings and Leslie's dog Onyx at the house of Tom Trulett, another friend who had lent them the place. Tom was a mutual friend of both Leslie and Kevin. In fact, he was the one who introduced them during a party. Both Nicholas's house and Tom's house were located on the same street and were about 33 feet apart. After handing over the keys to his place, Tom left for a party in the nearby town of La Crèche. Leslie and Kevin stayed alone at Tom's house and later decided to go over to Nicholas' place, bringing Onyx along. They spent a few hours at Nicholas' home, and around 3 a.m. they decided to head back to Tom's house to spend the night. However, after leaving Nicholas's house, the couple and their dog Onyx vanished without a trace. Nicholas Renew was the last person to see them. During interviews with the families, police learned that Leslie and Kevin had only been together for about 3 weeks. The couple lived in the French department of Charente-Maritimes, which borders Deux-Sèvres, the department where they went missing. Their families said they had planned to spend a few days in the small commune of Prahak, staying at friends' houses. Leslie often brought Onyx along when visiting nearby places. She had Onyx for almost 3 years, and Kevin didn't mind her bringing the dog, since he liked animals. Kevin's family said he loved nature and enjoyed hiking, something he and Leslie had in common. They also said Kevin was unemployed at the time, but he had recently bought a Mercedes Sprinter van and was renovating it with plans to turn it into a work vehicle. Kevin didn't have a very good childhood. His father was arrested when he was still very young, and from that point on, he had to learn to fend for himself as the family started facing hardships. Leslie, on the other hand, was described by her family as an outgoing person who loved animals and being at parties. She made friends easily and was almost always surrounded by people. She had a twin brother to whom she was very close. Her mother had passed away a few years earlier, something that was very hard on her. According to sources, Leslie owned a business that offered painting services for homes and commercial buildings. The company was called LH Painting, L for Leslie and H for Hurlbake. She wanted to have something of her own, something to be proud of, which is why she used her first and last name in the company's name. It's unclear exactly how long Leslie had been running the business, but what's known is that she had many clients. Before meeting Kevin, Leslie had been married for a few years, but things with her husband began to fall apart, and they separated in June 2022. According to sources, Leslie had met in October 2022. The couple had planned to take a few days off, specifically November 25th, 26th, and 27th. According to Kevin's mother, the young couple only planned to spend one day in Prague, which is where they disappeared. After that, they were going to another city called Bordeaux, a popular tourist destination in France. Since Nicholas was the last person to see the couple, he became a person of interest to the police, as he, in theory, could help them solve the disappearance. Kevin told the police that, the day before the disappearance, Leslie had bought some clothes, and she and Kevin had planned to go to a party in the city together. However, after leaving the house of Tom Trulett, the other friend who had lent them the house, the couple decided to spend some time with Nicholas at his place. Leslie's dog Onyx was with them. Nicholas said that around 2:30 a.m., he suggested the couple spend the night at his house if they wanted. But the couple said they would stay at Tom's house, which was very close. A few minutes later, the couple left Nicholas's home with the dog and headed toward Tom's house. They should have arrived in under a minute, as it was only about 33 feet away, but they never made it. Police also spoke with Tom Trulett, but he only said he had been at a party, and that the last time he saw the couple was when he left his house and gave them the keys. Tom said that when he returned, Kevin and Leslie were gone along with their belongings, leaving behind only a jacket, which the police seized as evidence. Tom told the police he didn't know anything else beyond that. A search was conducted by the police at both Tom's and Nicholas's houses. Investigators used luminol and other chemicals in an attempt to find traces of blood in both men's homes, but nothing was found. In addition to the couple's two friends who lived on the same street, police also spoke with other residents of the neighborhood who said they hadn't seen or heard anything unusual during the early hours of November 26th. At first, some people speculated that the couple had simply disappeared of their own will. The theory was that they might have been running from someone or just wanted to go on an adventure. The family strongly disagreed with these assumptions, saying they would never do something like that. Moreover, during a search of Kevin and Leslie's homes, police discovered that the couple hadn't taken many belongings, just enough for a few days away. Leslie's van, a white Peugeot partner she used for her building painting projects, was found parked in town. That was the vehicle Leslie and Kevin had been using to travel and intended to take to other cities. A quick search inside the van turned up nothing suspicious. Police also searched Kevin's Mercedes Sprinter van, which he had been renovating, but nothing suspicious was found there either. Because of this, early in the investigation, French authorities began to move away from the theory that the couple had disappeared voluntarily. The theory wasn't completely ruled out, but investigators decided to focus their efforts on other lines of inquiry. Another theory was that they had been hit by a vehicle and thrown into the woods, or that their bodies had been hidden by the driver responsible for the accident. However, no skid marks or any debris indicating a collision between a vehicle and a person were found. Typically, when a hit and run occurs, there are brake marks at the scene or vehicle fragments left behind, but nothing of the sort was found near the route the couple took on the day they vanished. In the following days, police searched the entire area surrounding the small commune of Prague. Search dogs were deployed, along with specialized forest search teams, and some volunteers, including family and friends, also joined the efforts. Divers helped as well, scanning the region's rivers and lakes, but despite all the effort, nothing was found. In a conversation with Kevin's stepmother, a woman named Corinne Pratt, authorities learned that Kevin had 10,000 euros with him at the time he disappeared along with his girlfriend and her dog. Corinne told police that she was the one who delivered the money to Kevin while he was staying at a friend's house. According to Corinne, the money was intended for the purchase of a car that belonged to someone Kevin knew. Corinne said that when she handed the money to her stepson, he seemed off, like he was afraid of something. She then asked Kevin if something had happened, to which he replied that there were some men in a car who seemed to be following him. After that, Corinne accompanied her stepson and Leslie to Tom's house, then returned to her city. According to her, that was the last she had contact with the young couple. The information about the tragic cases detailed in the provided transcript reveal systemic failures that transcend individual acts of violence. When examining the death of Kenyatta Barron and the harrowing assault on her children, the primary failure lies in the delayed assessment of the volatile environment created by Ronnie O'Neill. Despite established patterns of abuse and neighbor reports of escalating domestic conflict, institutional intervention remained reactive rather than preventative, missing opportunities to secure the household before the situation became lethal. In the case of Hughes, the investigation in San Francisco highlights a profound disregard for procedural rigor. Law enforcement officials categorized a suspicious death as a suicide, a conclusion reached without thorough forensic analysis of available evidence. By failing to preserve the crime scene and ignoring contradictory physical indicators, such as the missing murder weapon and unidentified biological traces, the department hindered the possibility of justice. This institutional laziness effectively shielded a potential assailant from meaningful scrutiny. The Banfield case in Virginia points to a different failure: the vulnerability of domestic security to external manipulation. When a conspiracy involves those within the household, the spouse and the nanny, traditional police assessments of home invasions can be dangerously misplaced. The failure here was one of initial investigative skepticism. Investigators initially accepted surface-level accounts without immediately interrogating the inconsistencies regarding forced entry and the suspicious timeline of 911 calls, allowing critical evidence to be compromised or overlooked. Mike Manshalt's death in Malta represents perhaps the most egregious example of institutional negligence. The speed with which Maltese authorities dismissed the death as a biking accident, coupled with the inexplicable disappearance of the victim's organs, suggests a catastrophic breakdown in forensic oversight. When local authorities fail to provide basic documentation or cooperate with international inquiries, they deny families the most fundamental right to know the truth. This was not merely incompetence, it was an active obstruction. Across these narratives, a recurring theme is the failure of the court system to adequately vet psychological and procedural claims. Whether it is a defendant using a self-serving mental health defense or a defense attorney leveraging minor clerical errors to vacate a detention warrant, the courts often privilege technicalities over substantive justice. These legal mechanisms, while designed to protect rights, frequently become tools to evade accountability, leaving families to navigate the aftermath of institutional indifference on their own. Social services and community monitoring also appear absent from these accounts. In cases involving children, the lack of proactive engagement by social workers or family outreach programs is stark. When domestic tensions reach a breaking point, the silence of neighbors and the hesitation of community support systems create a vacuum. The system relies on individuals to report danger, but when those reports are dismissed or ignored by authorities, the burden of protection falls upon the most vulnerable members. Law enforcement agencies in particular often prioritize statistical outcomes over investigative thoroughness. By classifying deaths as undetermined or accidental, departments keep their case resolution numbers high and avoid the arduous, expensive, and politically taxing process of solving complex homicides. This managerial approach to policing creates a dangerous environment where victims are underserved and perpetrators are emboldened. The result is a society where the truth is sacrificed for the sake of institutional convenience and administrative simplicity. Forensic pathology acts as the final safeguard for the deceased, yet in these stories it functioned as a corrupted process. Whether through the lack of autopsy reports in the Mansholt case or the failure to collect DNA evidence in the death of Hughes, the gatekeepers of truth failed their mandate. When pathologists and coroners are not independent or rigorous, the entire legal chain is broken, rendering subsequent efforts to find justice almost impossible for those left behind. The role of international communication is also a significant failure point. In cases involving foreign nationals such as Mansholt or Hughes, the disconnect between local investigators and the family's home countries creates an impenetrable wall. Diplomatic channels are often too slow or bureaucratic to exert the pressure necessary for justice. Without a standardized protocol for cross-border criminal investigations, the victims' families are forced to act as their own detectives, a task for which they are unprepared. Ultimately, these systemic failures share a common root: the deprioritization of truth. When the system operates on assumptions rather than facts, assuming a suicide, assuming an accident, or assuming a home invasion, it abdicates its responsibility to the public. Each case provides a clear roadmap of where intervention could have occurred, from the first call of distress to the final verdict. The failure to grasp these opportunities is a tragedy that compounds the original acts of violence. The persistence of these issues suggests that the reforms required are fundamental rather than incremental. Improved police training is not enough if the investigative culture remains focused on clearing cases quickly. Enhanced court oversight is futile if legal loopholes remain easily exploitable by motivated defense counsel. True justice requires a commitment to integrity, where institutions value the lives lost enough to pursue every lead, even when it is inconvenient, costly, or politically damaging to those involved. We must also consider the psychological impact on the survivors who witness these systemic failures. The ordeal of losing a loved one to violence is only the beginning. The second trauma is navigating a bureaucracy that treats the case as a statistic. When authorities refuse to return organs or withhold case files, they perpetuate the pain. The system's inability to provide closure is a secondary victimizing force, one that can be just as devastating as the crime itself. The accountability of institutions is the foundation of public trust. When that trust is shattered by a sequence of documented failures, the societal contract is weakened. These stories demonstrate that justice is rarely served automatically. It requires the relentless, exhausting effort of individuals, journalists, private investigators, and determined family members. A robust system should not require such extreme efforts from civilians to uncover basic truths. It should provide them as a matter of standard procedure. Reflecting on these cases serves as a sobering reminder of the gaps between the promise of law and the reality of its application. While we look to institutions for protection and closure, the evidence shows that we must also scrutinize them with vigilance. The gap between what is reported as an official version and the underlying facts is where the most dangerous abuses of power and negligence occur. We must bridge this gap through demand for transparency. In the end, the common thread across all these incidents is that they were preventable or solvable if the protocols of justice had been followed with fidelity. The failure was not a lack of resources, but a lack of resolve. If we are to honor those who have suffered, we must document these failings not to retell their agony, but to insist on the systemic changes that can prevent the next family from enduring the same hollow, unresolved outcome.